Change is coming to the European military landscape, and not in the way you might expect. For years, the same countries have stood atop the index for Europe's strongest military powers. With 8 military satellites in orbit, 13 naval frigates, 8 submarines, and 850 aircraft, Italy consistently ranks high on the list. France is no walkover either, with 300 nuclear weapons in its arsenal and an aircraft carrier, 3 helicarriers, and 10 military bases from which it can project one of the world's best counter-terrorism strike forces into the corners of the globe. There is reason to believe France will remain one of the preeminent European powers for years to come. Then there's the UK, consistently viewed as one of the world's strongest military powers not just in Europe. It possesses 25 overseas military bases, 2 aircraft carriers, 10 excellent nuclear submarines, and 663 aircraft. Even if its reserves of tanks, of which it only has 227, and artillery 215, remain comparatively low. In a few years, these rankings might be all about to change. Finland and Sweden, NATO's newest members, look poised to play a central role in European deterrence measures against Putin's Russia and are preparing accordingly. The countries along NATO's Eastern European flank, from the Baltics down to the Black Sea, have long maintained respectable rapid response forces as part of a robust, collective military presence. Poland, too, is committed to flexing its own military muscle. For several years now, it's been steadily replacing its Soviet stockpile with modern Western weapons systems and munitions in a bid to become Europe's strongest land army by 2026. It has an ongoing deal to acquire almost 500 HIMARS long-range missile systems, has been steadily integrating the latest US M1A21 SEP version 3 Abrams tanks, Apache helicopters, and F-35s. It's also branched out, importing the latest in South Korean armor and artillery whose global reputation is growing. And then there's Germany. Yes, the European country which for decades now has routinely fallen well short of its defense goals now seems eager to jump to the top of Europe's military spending leaderboards. It may seem like a shock, but last year German politicians finally read the room and realized that with one of the world's largest GDPs, it was high time to pull its weight in NATO and revamp its armed forces. Indeed, the war in Ukraine seems like it has cast everything into the proper perspective. Today, Germany is not only gearing up to overhaul its armed forces, it wants to do so by becoming the world's third largest military spender. I'm sure none of you had that on your bingo card a year or two ago. It's been some time since German leaders expressed this desire. Naturally, it's worth following up to see how bad things had actually gotten in the German armed forces, how the military overhaul is currently going, and whether Germany will be able to keep on track to achieve its lofty military goals in the near and long-term future. Prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was fair to say that the reputation of what, on paper, should undeniably be one of Europe's most feared militaries was poor, to put it mildly. At the tail end of the 2010s, reports began to emerge documenting the unexpected devolution of one of the fiercest and most brutal fighting forces on Earth into what one observer likened to a glorified volunteer fire department, one whose venerated mountain troops were routinely deployed to shovel snow from roofs in Bavaria rather than conduct cutting-edge military exercises. What went wrong for the once vaunted Bundeswehr? Well, a lot actually, so much that it's sort of hard to know where to begin. Like most things, Germany's current situation didn't unfold in a vacuum. The problems trace back to the end of the Cold War, a period of renewed hope and opportunity for the German people. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the reintegration of East and West Germany, and the collapse of the USSR as a regional military rival changed Germany's security outlook virtually overnight. Suddenly, money the German parliament had funneled into military expenditures had better use revamping the country's economic, political, and social institutions. There was simply no proximate military threat worthy enough to merit continued military spending at Cold War levels. Knowing that NATO and, more importantly, the United States could collectively guarantee Europe's long-term security, the country and its people, still struggling through the memories of 2 world wars, felt like it could afford to draw down its military capabilities without imperiling its overall safety. This process started in the early 1990s. Few realized at the time that it would continue practically unabated until 2022. This, then, is the root of Germany's modern military weakness. Germany's decision to focus inward propelled it to incredibly prosperous economic heights. Yet this choice came at the expense of a significant chunk of its military funding. The result has been endemic shortages of manpower and materiel. By late 2018, Germany could boast 68 Tiger attack helicopters, yet just 20% of them could fly. It had plenty of Eurofighters, 136 in all, but only 30% of those were airworthy. The state of the German Air Force got so bad that its pilots started to quit in droves. On top of that, Germany's aging Tornado fighters, the country's only aerial platform that can carry its nuclear warheads, were scheduled to be decommissioned. The state of military disrepair extended to the infantry, who, according to reports, has suffered from shortages of everything from ammunition to underwear of late. As of 2019, the main battle rifle of the German armed forces, the Heckler & Koch G36, was in the process of being scrapped after studies revealed serious defects in its accuracy. In other words, that the gun misses its target if it's too hot. In a visit to a Lithuanian outpost where 450 German soldiers were stationed as part of a NATO mission to protect Europe's eastern flank, American officials were dismayed to discover Bundeswehr personnel communicating on unsecure mobile phones due to a shortage of secure radio equipment. Equipment deficiencies and shortages were paralleled by increased recruiting difficulties. Germany's recent goal to raise its recruitment thresholds by 20,000 troops, founded as many of its potential enlistees, discovered the pitiful living conditions at its military barracks. As a result, Germany has been forced to contemplate a seemingly unimaginable alternative: filling empty recruitment pools with foreign nationals. The problem it now faces is a legal one, since German law only allows those with citizenship to serve in its military. At a certain point, Germany's military shortcomings became so apparent it led high-ranking Bundeswehr officials to declare, no matter where you look, there's dysfunction. Meanwhile, Germany's allies were likely wondering in private why the Germans only terrible at war when they're on our side. The most vociferous of Germany's critics was the leader of the ally it could ill afford to antagonize, the United States. At the tail end of Donald Trump's 4-year term as president, the mercurial American began pressuring Germany to up its defense spending and meet the suggested NATO obligation 2% of GDP. The problem was that even if Angela Merkel, the German chancellor at the time and leader of the center-right bloc of politicians most critics placed blame for decades of diminutive military spending, decided to try to effect some sort of change, it was simply impossible to overhaul the Bundeswehr overnight. This is because power stems from many overlapping variables like industrial capacity, financial and organizational strength, research and development, and political and social support. This is a battle on multiple fronts, German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen said as she tried to fend off Trump's criticism in 2019. "I also wish things would move more quickly, but 25 years of shrinkage and cuts can't be reversed in just a few years." That was the goal to which Germany set itself at the dawn of the 2020s, to reverse 25 years of shrinkage and cuts. And so Germany did probably the most German thing it could. It decided to spend hundreds of millions of euros on outside consultants to try to clean up the army's mess. When their findings and recommendations were clearly failing to correct course, the German parliament took matters into their own hands, forming a special investigative committee to look into irregularities in procurement and accusations that the consultants were given sweetheart deals and too much influence. Hundreds of millions of euros didn't even put a dent in the GDP of arguably the world's most heavily industrialized country. Yet it did reveal perpetual mismanagement and an overall lack of strategic thinking on the best way to modernize the nation's military forces. "Everything takes too long and costs too much money," remarked Hans-Peter Bartels, who between 2015 and 20 served as parliamentary commissioner for the armed forces. "It's as if time and money were endless resources, and in the end, no one takes responsibility." Which begs the perennial question, why? Why, given Germany's geopolitical standing and its awareness that Russia and China posed a far greater threat by the early 2020s than they did a decade earlier, did it continue to sit on its hands? More German media bandwidth was focused outward on Trump's threats of withdrawing from NATO than inward on its own military potential. Germany had an intractable problem. It was at once reliant on the United States' 33,000 soldier presence and its robust nuclear umbrella for its own defense, yet extremely critical of anyone who called its NATO commitment into question. It had an intense public disdain for armed engagement, logically rooted in its recent past, yet had formed strong economic, technological, and energy interdependencies with its ideological rivals. The German populace had, by all measures, been lulled into a false sense of security. Everything changed on February 24, 2022. Putin's invasion of Ukraine pulled the carpet from under the German political establishment. Concurrent with Putin's military buildup, Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced to the world's surprise that Germany would up its 1.46% defense spending and fulfill its 2% of GDP goal for the first time since 1990. 3 days after Putin greenlit the first large-scale ground war in Europe since World War II, Scholz went even further than before, characterizing the moment at the Bundestag rostrum as a change of era, making a commitment to reversing its decades-old minimalist defense policies in lieu of the type of sweeping overhaul befitting Germany's economic stature. The announcement was met with fanfare in Parliament. The Chancellor set aside a veritable war chest to achieve this goal, a $100 billion special fund authorized to modernize its military forces. The decision was met with a 75% approval rating. There have been several encouraging developments since Scholz's proclamations. Germany has been one of Europe's most generous suppliers of military aid to Ukraine since the start of the conflict, doling out serious arms packages from its federal armed forces that include infantry fighting vehicles, Leopard main battle tanks, though they certainly dragged their feet there for months longer than they should have, mine-resistant armored vehicles, Iris-T air defense systems, howitzers, munitions, drones, and smaller items like helmets, mobile antennas, night vision goggles, and logistics vehicles. The process of donating old equipment has incentivized German politicians and arms industry leaders to fill the vacuum. Yet old patterns are starting to emerge. After 2 decades of neglect, critics are now repeating an old complaint that Berlin still lacks an overall strategy for its defense industry. Spending 100 billion euros will not guarantee military might. While many hoped that Germany would use the money to reinvest in its own defense industry, something the United States has been doing since the start of the conflict in Ukraine, Berlin has come under fire for also investing in US defense companies. In July 2023, a leading tank gearbox manufacturer claimed that nearly half of the $100 billion special fund had gone to American defense companies. Germany does not have a strategic compass for the defense industry, claimed Suzanne Wiegand, chief executive of Renk Group. This is something the French are handling much better. Essentially, Wiegand believed the special fund should be used for more than plugging short-term gaps in the German military's inventories, but also to help develop technologies of the future. This makes a lot of sense, but a year after Scholz promised to use his special fund, little seems to have changed. Over the past 12 months, a flurry of reports have continued to shed light on German military unpreparedness. Strangled by bureaucracy, one headline reads. Germany's army is so under-equipped that it used broomsticks instead of machine guns, read another. In February 2023, a prominent foreign policy spokesman for the Christian Democratic Union told a German news outlet that the military had lost a year and is barer than it was at the start of 2022. Sure, the German Defense Ministry had placed several new orders for F-35 fighter jets, heavy transport helicopters, and a new program designed to digitize the apparently obsolescent digital communications and networking capabilities of the Bundeswehr. Interest rates on the loan Parliament took out for the 100 billion euro special fund rose from 8 billion to 13 billion euros, leaving only 87 billion euros to spend, to say nothing of inflation and value-added taxes, which looks set to strike another 15 billion euros or so from the ledger books. The longer you have this money sitting around somewhere, the longer factors like inflation and interest payments have to eat away at this pile, one economist stated. Recently, however, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has been arguing that the 100 billion euro special fund is far from enough to meet the Bundeswehr's eye-opening needs. While he has modestly asked for budgetary increases in the realms of tens of billions of euros, likely to escape severe political and public pressure, others have estimated that to make Germany the backbone of Europe's defense, it needs to do much more. In February 2024, Pistorius argued that overturning 2 decades of minimal military expenditures may require Germany to surpass its 2% target, which it met for the first time this year. The development of our industry all has to fit together, he recently told the German parliament. We might reach 3%, maybe even 3.5%. It depends what's happening in the world. Germany is at a serious inflection point. In 2021, the country spent 52.8 billion euros on defense, 7th in the global rankings, certainly ahead of France, but still behind Russia and the UK. As a percentage of its GDP, among the 20 largest global economies, it came in far lower, just 15th. As Germany hits its renewed spending targets, it looks set to catapult itself higher into the rankings. Spending an annual amount of 76.1 billion euros would put it ahead of Russia, India, and the UK. It would lead the EU by some distance, though it would still pale in comparison to the US and China. More importantly, increased military spending will finally enable Germany to back its rhetorical and economic leadership of the European community with cold, hard steel. In the past, Germany's allies and adversaries alike were slow to take it seriously in matters of defense. Today, this looks set to change. Germany has expressed its desire to build a modernized, high-tech, powerful military, The F-35s represent a step in the right direction, as do the future combat air systems it's developing jointly with France, its attempts to modernize its naval fleet, and its attention on changes in drone warfare. But if it wants to become a true military superpower, Germany must continue to spend wisely for the foreseeable future. It must give equal weight to the tail end of the spear – logistics, intelligence, cyber warfare, training, and experience – as it gives the tip – high-tech weapons, vehicles, and equipment. As mentioned before, Germany is still getting the basics wrong. To be able to secure itself, not to mention its European and regional allies and partners, it must address what it's neglected for years. It needs to get its existing helicopters, aircrafts, and tanks operational. It needs to get the 50% of military hardware found to be dysfunctional back into working condition. And it must find the funding and the social support to raise public respect for the German armed forces, so it can overcome its chronic personnel shortages and material deficiencies. A job in the military does not have the kudos in Germany that it does elsewhere, owing to the country's wartime past, Pistorius recently claimed. This would have to change, and would require, by most accounts, a unique cultural change that amounted to more than business as usual, but with more money. Germany has a clear opportunity to prove its naysayers wrong by wholeheartedly picking up the baton of European security. It's a moment of severe uncertainty for Europe, a time when the West could truly benefit from Germany's steadfast commitment to building a credible military with true deterrent potential. Today, American support for Ukraine is more uncertain than ever. There's a very real chance that depending on the way the American presidential election pans out in 2024, European figureheads like Germany and France will have to put their money where their mouth is. If the invasion of Ukraine reinforced the gravity of the threat at their doorsteps, dwindling American political and material support may leave them with no choice but to shoulder an increased burden of defense spending, revamp its arms production, and help Ukraine in areas where it's falling short. The Estonian Defense Ministry recently estimated that Western countries would need to invest just 0.25% of their GDP in military assistance to Ukraine in order to enable the country to continue defending itself in 2024 and prepare a new counteroffensive in 2025. Europe must show that it's committed to its own defense, and Germany, as the richest European power, has to stand at the front of the line. To succeed, it has had to overcome its bureaucratically encumbered procurement system, one that an expert described as suffering from a perfectionism in its regulations that often means the troops don't actually get what they need. This manifests itself in German tank crews not receiving standardized radio equipment as their NATO allies, Germany's various political coalitions at loggerheads over the degree of urgency to approach military modernization, and more. Germany can be pleased that, by and large, its penchant for perfectionism in the field of procurement has been ironed out. The arms industry has been working harder to increase capacity, namely in the creation of a new Rheinmetall munitions factory that can churn out 200,000 artillery shells a year, yet this may still fall short of ideal. Germany is set upon a generational task, not only to restructure, but in a first step to simply fill the gaps in the German armed forces. Germany's actions in the defense sphere since Russia's invasion, in light of its own past, have been nothing short of revolutionary. The question is, will Scholz and Germany's coalition government be able to establish a viable modernization strategy that can guide its military agenda for decades to come, or if this process will bend and wither according to the changing political winds? What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Now go check out how Poland is becoming Europe's next military superpower, or click this other video instead. Ever thought Italy was just about art, history, and delicious food? Think again. The nation's stepping up its military game, and it's got quite the shopping list. From planning to acquire more drones to dreaming of a new fleet of tanks and advanced F-35 fighter jets, Italy's on a mission to revamp its armed forces. But why this sudden shift? And what could it mean for Italy's role on the global stage and its ability to handle high-intensity conflicts? Buckle up as we dive into Italy's silent military buildup, the tech they're eyeing, and how they plan to shake off decades of being under the NATO radar. Join us as our military experts dive into the tale of underdog ambition, high-tech aspirations, and a strategic makeover that could change the game. Like most countries in Western Europe, Italy has long been behind the NATO benchmark of 2% of GDP spent on defense. The last time it spent that much was in the 1980s, when the Soviet and Warsaw Pact still acutely threatened Europe. Between 1991 and 2022, Italy usually spent around 1.5% of GDP on its military. The trend lowered in the mid-2010s, even after Russia demonstrated its initial aggression against Ukraine. In 2015, Italy spent a record low of 1.2% on defense. After the full-scale invasion, Rome announced its intention to change course and spend 2% on defense, but that this would be delayed until 2028. When Giorgia Meloni became Prime Minister in September 2022, she vowed to continue the build-up and be less quiet about it, as previous governments had done in order to avoid criticism from the Catholic Church. 6 months later, Meloni's government revealed some of the items on the Italian military's shopping list, as well as some of its vulnerabilities. One glaring weakness is a lack of drones. In March 2023, the leader of the Italian Navy, Amiral Enrico Credendino, told the legislature that his force lacked drones and needed to rely on their American allies to provide them upon request. He also criticized the shortage of personnel, saying that there were not enough sailors to guarantee one full crew for any of Italy's FREMM frigates. In contrast, the French Navy had 2 rotating crews for each of its FREMMs. General Luciano Portolano, Italy's National Armaments Director, said that the country lacked tanks too. Concerned with the aging 1990s vintage C-1 Ariete tanks in the fleet, he suggested a dire need for 250 new tanks, 125 of which might be upgraded Arietes. This would leave a gap of 125. Despite the low spending and dire warnings from its commanders, the Italian military is still more capable than many people would expect. Italy's military is currently ranked 10th in the Global Firepower Index, ahead of France. It has an active duty force of 165,000, with 289,000 total personnel, 18,500 reserves, and 105,000 paramilitary troops. Out of a total population of 61 million, Italy has an available manpower of 27.4 million. 22.2 million of these people are considered fit for service, and about 549,000 reach military age annually. The GFI says that Italy has 200 tanks, with 150 of them being fit for combat. Other sources are much grimmer, with suggestions that only 50 of Italy's tanks are fit to fight. Meanwhile, Italy has about 61,900 other vehicles, with about 46,400 ready. In terms of artillery, Italy has 64 self-propelled units, 108 towed units, and 21 MLRS units. 48, 81, and 16 are considered ready, respectively. In terms of naval power, the Italian Navy has 54 hulls in its fleet. 2 of these are aircraft carriers, which are the 16-year-old Cavour and the 39-year-old Giuseppe Garibaldi, respectively. It has 8 submarines, 4 destroyers, 11 frigates, 10 mine warfare ships, and 16 offshore patrol vessels. In the skies, it has 800 total assets, with 600 being ready. 90 of these are fighters, 67 are attack types, 29 transports, 163 trainers, 28 are special mission aircraft, 8 are tankers, 402 are helicopters, and 57 of these are of the attack variety. Still, Italy sees an urgent need to increase the firepower of its armed forces and the number of assets it has to call upon. The war in Ukraine revealed just how rapidly these stockpiles can be depleted in a high-intensity, state-based conflict. For example, Russia recently lost 11 fighter jets in 11 days, and even at the height of the success of its operations in the summer and fall of 2022, Ukraine was losing 2 tanks per day. That would give Italy's tank fleet only 100 days before being completely depleted, and there is reason to suspect that a greater industrial conflict would have a much higher attrition rate. The F-35 Lightning II was one of the weapons the Italian brass specifically requested in March 2023. Italy already ordered a force of 60 F-35A and 15 F-35B fighters for its air force in 2020. The Italian Navy ordered an additional 15 F-35B aircraft for a total of 90. By April 2023, 23 had been delivered, but the previous month, Italy's Air Force commander, General Luca Goretti, said he wanted 41 more, taking the total from 90 to 131. This was in fact the original order dating from 2012. However, this was also the time near the lows of Italy's defense spending, and in such a time, 131 aircraft seemed unnecessary, so the order was cut to 90. The times have clearly changed. This will be a formidable addition to the roughly 100 capable Eurofighter Typhoons already in the Italian air fleet. On land, Italy wants to order HIMARS systems to augment its rocket artillery force, which is in need of more units. Italy has also expressed interest in the next-generation tank that France and Germany have collaborated on since 2012, the European Main Ground Combat System, MGCS. As part of this effort, the Italian defense contractor Leonardo has agreed to cooperate with Germany's Rheinmetall and France's Nexter to build the European tank of the future. This tank will be set to replace the Ariete, the French Leclerc, and the German Leopard 2. The MGCS's designers also intend for it to replace at least some of the infantry fighting vehicles in the fleets of European countries. This is because they want it to be a modular vehicle capable of providing several different functions. There is danger in this. The quest for modularity was one of the reasons why the F-35 program suffered so many years of delays and cost overruns. The United States' Littoral Combat Ship program, which also sought modularity, has proven to be a disaster of epic proportions. Still, the Europeans seem convinced that they can make it work. More immediately, Italy is also looking to buttress its tank forces with the latest version of the German Leopard 2 tank, the 2A8. In July 2023, Rome announced that it would buy 133 of these from Berlin, filling the gap mentioned in March and then some. Italy will modify these to further suit its needs. At the same time, Italy said it would continue upgrading the 125 domestic Ariete tanks as announced in March. These 125 C1 Arietes will be modernized to the latest version, the C3, which would give the tank better armor, fire control systems, and engines. The new fire control system will come with a modern ballistic computer and new digital sights with thermal cameras for the commander and gunner manufactured by Leonardo. The C3 version of the Ariete will also boast a new turret, which will be a top-to-bottom redesign of the current one. Electronic actuators will replace the current hydraulics, which will make it safer to operate. A laser warning system is also part of the Ariete modernization plan. The upgrades to these Ariete tanks will extend their service life to 2034, by which time the MCGS is expected to enter service. Italy is also upgrading its B-1 Centauro tank destroyer, an armored vehicle with a specific anti-tank purpose. This upgrade is called the B-2. The Centauro was designed for the specific purpose of destroying Soviet and Warsaw Pact tanks, a purpose which has seen renewed consideration in the wake of the war in Ukraine. The B-2 weighs slightly more than its predecessor and comes with improved fire control systems for the commander and gunner, including infrared cameras that can spot targets up to 10 kilometers away in all weather conditions and at night. It's connected to a digital network that can share its data with other vehicles and command centers. The main armament, a 120mm cannon, gives it firepower equal to that of most of the world's existing main battle tanks. The B-2 further stabilizes this weapon along 3 axes, which means that the gunner will have improved accuracy even when the vehicle is moving over rough terrain. Though not a tank, the Centauro has enough armor to shield its crew well against most threats. It can withstand hits from 30mm rounds at the front, 25mm rounds on the sides, and 12.7mm rounds in the back. The vehicle's V-shaped hull design also protects its operators from mines and improvised explosive devices. The turret can carry additional composite armor plates, which will add weight to the vehicle but increase its protection enough to withstand hits from 40mm armor-piercing discarding sabot rounds. Inside, there are plates lined with Kevlar, which further protect the crew from explosive fragments coming from shells that manage to pierce the outer armor. Italian engineers are looking to further increase the Centauro's protection with active systems seen on main battle tanks, and to the possibility of outfitting it with explosive reactive armor to add even more defenses. Along with this armament and armor comes high speed. The B-2 has a top speed of 110 km/h, making it significantly faster than main battle tanks. The Centauro's design is flexible enough to accommodate significant modifications. It can be deployed as a self-propelled artillery unit, the 155mm Centauro Porcupine, that can fire up to 8 rounds per minute against targets 60 km away. The Centauro can also be modified into an anti-air system, the Draco. In this configuration, it carries a 76mm naval gun, redesigned to fit the vehicle's chassis. A coaxial 7.62mm or 12.7mm machine gun can serve as a secondary weapon. The Draco can hit targets between 6 and 8 kilometers in the sky. The war in Ukraine has shown the renewed importance of these old-style flak cannon systems, as using expensive surface-to-air missiles to shoot down cheap kamikaze drones is not an economically sustainable method of waging war. The Draco therefore served as an ideal counter to loitering munitions like the Iranian Shahed and Russian Lancet. Italy's participation in the MGCS is also part of why it started a program to replace its Dardo infantry fighting vehicle. This vehicle entered service in 1998, and though this makes it a newer platform than many of its peers, such as the American Bradley, the Italians see the need for something even newer. The Italians plan to buy over 1,000 of whatever new vehicle is selected to replace the Dardo. 3 vehicles are in contention. The first is the KF-41 Lynx, the second is the Boxer, and the third is the CV-90. The Lynx was revealed by its designer, Germany's Rheinmetall company, in the mid-2010s, and has already entered service with the Hungarian army. The Lynx comes with a crew of 3 operators and can carry 8 soldiers. Its range is 500 kilometers and has a top speed of 70 kilometers per hour. Its armament comes in the form of a 35mm gun, a 7.62mm machine gun, and optional anti-tank guided missiles. Aside from its base armor, the Lynx can be equipped with a hard-kill protection system that improves its defenses against anti-material weapons. It's smart too, and automatically launches smoke grenades when it detects that a laser is pointing at it, reducing its vulnerability and the chance of being hit by anti-tank missiles with laser guidance. It even has a shooter locating system that detects the direction of incoming enemy fire. The Boxer is a vehicle co-developed by Germany and the Netherlands. The British were originally involved but withdrew in 2003. It entered service in 2009, has a crew of 3 operators and can carry 8 troops. Defense is the Boxer's strongest suit, and experts regard it as one of the world's most protective armored personnel carriers. It's made of modular armor mixed with ceramics, and it's shaped to guard against anti-tank mines in particular. Its manufacturers claim that the front can withstand hits from 30mm cannons, while the side armor is durable against fire from 12.7mm anti-material rounds. Armored slabs which have taken damage can be replaced in the field. The Boxer is also designed to have a low radar signature. While highly armored, the Boxer is lacking in offensive potential compared to the Lynx. Its main armament is a 40mm grenade launcher in the German version, while the Dutch version comes only with a 12.7mm machine gun. The Italians have indicated they would be interested in a tracked version of the Boxer. Perhaps most importantly, the vehicle is composed of variants of parts which are commercially available. This would ensure a steady supply in the event of a wider conflict, as lost vehicles and parts would be more easily replaceable. France's Project Scorpion is creating vehicles with similar, commercially available parts for this reason. Finally, there's the CV90, a vehicle of Swedish manufacture. It also comes with an operating crew of 3 and can carry up to 8 soldiers. The CV90 first came into service in 1993. Its latest variant, the Armadillo, is also a highly protective APC, with all-round protection against 25mm armor-piercing shells. It's also designed to withstand blasts from mines and IEDs. Its manufacturer, the British firm BAE Systems, claims it can take hits from mines with explosive weight over 10 kilograms and is ideal for urban warfare settings. The CV90 has a remote-controlled weapon that can be armed with a 40mm automatic grenade launcher, a 12.7mm machine gun, a 7.62mm machine gun, or a 35mm cannon. Currently, the Lynx is considered the leader in the race for a Dardo replacement in the Italian military. Meanwhile, Italy is planning to do much more than acquire more F-35s for its air force. The Italians are looking to introduce a new attack helicopter to provide close air support for its troops and vehicles on the ground, one supposedly even better than the American Apache. This is the Augusta AW249 Phoenix. It was first revealed in 2017 and had its maiden flight in August 2022. It's designed to afford better protection than its predecessor, the Augusta AW129, which entered service in 1990 and which Italy wants to retire either next year or in 2026. The Phoenix will be armed with a 20mm rotary cannon and have 6 stations that can host air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground missiles, unguided rockets, or additional fuel tanks. The Phoenix will have a maximum takeoff weight of 8 tons. There's also a Polish variant in the works as part of that country's own significant military buildup. The Italian brass expects that the Phoenix will have a service life of 30 years. Italy is also a participant in an effort to develop a 6th-generation jet fighter in partnership with the United Kingdom and Japan. This is the Global Combat Air Program, GCAP. The ejection seats were successfully tested in 2023. Collaborative development on the aircraft will begin in 2025, with the first demonstration aircraft expected by 2027 and entry into service by 2035. In addition to supporting existing weapons like the Beyond Visual Range Meteor air-to-air missile, the product of the GCAP, called the Tempest, will feature open architecture to support future systems. The plane will be equipped with laser weapons likely for both offensive and defensive purposes. In a move that might make sci-fi fans nervous, the Tempest will supposedly feature mind-reading AI technology. The AI can step in and assist the human pilot when under extreme stress. Over time, this AI will even build unique biometric and psychometric profiles on each Tempest pilot. Although the Tempest will primarily act as a manned fighter, it can be operated as a drone and will feature drone wingmen under the command of the mother plane. The Tempest will be made of composite materials that feature additives designed to help the plane operate at higher temperatures. The war in Ukraine has revealed that aircraft attrition will be high in a peer or near-peer conflict. This is why the GCAP is incorporating digital engineering technology and other processes designed to reduce the timeframe needed to manufacture the aircraft. This should also make it more replaceable in an attritional scenario. Italy's main contribution to the Tempest program will be through Leonardo. The company will design the fighter's avionics and electronic systems. Leonardo in turn will be assisted by fellow Italian company Elettronica, which supplies electronic equipment to the Italian military. Leonardo's tasks should include designing an ideal cockpit system, customizable by the pilot, one which feeds data into the heads-up displays of the helmet. These helmets will supposedly be able to project augmented and even virtual reality imagery and will have a virtual assist to help sift through the data. The company is also working on the Tempest's communication systems and sensors, called the Integrated Sensing and Non-Kinetic Effects, ISANKI. ISANKI will be composed of a sensor network comprising the Tempest's entire airframe. This will enhance electronic warfare, identifying and appropriately responding to incoming threats, and even aid the laser weapons the Tempest will be armed with. While geography and present realities necessitate that Italy devote most of its attention to its land forces, improving the Italian Navy is also on Rome's agenda. First, Italy wants to develop a new version of the FREMM frigate. These come with either two 76mm anti-submarine guns or one 127mm gun, and a general-purpose 76mm gun. These ships also carry Theseus II anti-ship missiles with a range in excess of 350 kilometers. Two 25mm autocannons are also on board. These can defend against aircraft, drones, or missiles. Italy is also working on an effort to develop a new class of ship, the European Patrol Corvette. The effort also includes Spain, France, Denmark, Romania, and Greece. Portugal also might have some interest. This patrol ship will have at least two versions, combat and long-range patrol. Italy seems to prefer the combat version, but both will mount a 3D radar and come with short or medium-range anti-air missiles. The corvettes will also supposedly emphasize drones and network connection between different forces on the battlefield. More substantially, the Italian Navy is developing the 10,000-ton DDX destroyer, which is set to replace two 1990s vintage destroyers currently serving, the ITS Durand de la Penne and ITS Mimbelli. The DDX will emphasize long-range firepower, with 6 8-cell missile launchers. These can launch Aster anti-air missiles or missiles that can attack targets on land. Leonardo will manufacture the ship's guns, which include a 127mm main gun and three 76mm secondary guns. The main gun will be able to shoot Leonardo's Vulcan-guided munitions. The 76mm guns can fire the Dart-guided munition. There will also be a helicopter deck able to host two Navy EH-101 or two SH-90 helicopters. To support amphibious operations, the Italian Navy is also planning a new landing ship, the LXD, to replace its older landing craft. These will be twice as big at 16,500 tons and host a 30mm close-in defense gun. They can carry up to 20 of the new wheeled amphibious landing craft Italy agreed to buy in 2023 from the domestic Iveco company. Italy also announced plans in July 2019 to get 4 new U-212 submarines based on a licensing agreement with Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems. These will replace the older Soro-class submarines in its fleet, and the first will enter service in 2025. These will be diesel-electric submarines which can stay underwater for about 30 days and fire Black Shark torpedoes. Because of its defeat in World War II and its low level of defense spending after the Cold War, Italy does not enjoy a great military reputation. However, that was always something of a misnomer, and the military Italy plans to build will make it a center of European hard power. Although demographic problems with an aging population will bring recruitment difficulties, and the financial means are not guaranteed, Italy still intends to invest heavily in its forces. To policymakers in Rome, the resurgence of an aggressive Russia and the return of war to the European continent have left them with little choice. But what do you think of Italy's military buildup? Will it succeed in making the country a premier player in European and global hard power capabilities? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Now go and check out how the German military will become Europe's most powerful, or click this other video instead. Also, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to support the channel and for more military analysis from military experts. In February 2024, French President Emmanuel Macron issued a statement that shocked the world. After a meeting in Paris of over 20 European heads of state and other Western officials, Macron issued a stark warning to Vladimir Putin: "We will do everything needed so Russia cannot win the war." If that wasn't incendiary enough, in his next breath, the French leader openly discussed the possibility of deploying Western troops to fight in Ukraine. There's no consensus today to send in an official, endorsed manner troops on the ground, but in terms of dynamics, nothing can be ruled out. Putin's response was predictably furious. According to Al Jazeera, the Russian leader had this to say on the matter. The West has announced the possibility of sending Western military contingents to Ukraine. The consequences for possible interventionists will be way more tragic. Not for the first time in the last 2 years, the rest of the world has been left facing the very real possibility of a wider conflict that may have a nuclear conclusion. But what led us to this critical stage? If you were to take a step back and soberly assess the situation, it's easy to see why Putin was so riled by Macron's not-so-thinly veiled threats. After all, one of the main historical bones of contention for Moscow was NATO expansion into Central and Eastern Europe, most notably the establishment of a fully operational military base on Polish soil. Having been subjected to countless invasions and occupations throughout its colorful history, from Genghis Khan to Napoleon Bonaparte, Russia saw this as an act of aggression and a threat to its sovereignty. To put another great military-shaped fly into the ointment, 20,000 troops from 9 countries have recently participated in full-blown North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, exercises in Central or Eastern Europe. Where, exactly? You guessed it, northern Poland. Taking all of the above into account, how close are we to a Western troop deployment in the war in Ukraine? And would that inevitably lead to a global conflict, maybe even of World War III proportions? That's the question that we'll attempt to answer in this video. Before we begin, we must acknowledge that the mere presence of a relatively large number of US, French, and British troops in Poland could easily be interpreted as a hugely provocative act by Russia in itself. Granted, Western leaders have attempted to put a far more benign spin on the situation. Terms like testing the NATO alliance's deterrence and defense capabilities have been bandied around in the press. But because Macron has made such pointed statements of potential intent, it can easily be seen by some as adding kerosene to an already blazing fire. But what exactly were the troops doing there? Well, according to an in-depth report from Defense News, nothing more than standard military drills. Following deployment, the participating nations undertook many maneuvers, both on land and amphibious, the likes of which are seen in any training exercises conducted by any army in any part of the world. Tellingly, however, these drills included a challenging river crossing. As part of the Polish-led Dragon 24 military exercise, American, British, French, German, Spanish, Turkish, Slovenian, and Lithuanian soldiers traveled across a 320-meter section of the Vistula River. They chose this time of year to host this event, said Major General Cezary Wisniewski, a senior Polish military official, as the waterway can be difficult to navigate in early March. We wanted the most challenging conditions. The water levels of the river are very high and the winds are usually strong. The crossing involved positioning floating bridges, which then had to be loaded with tanks to navigate from the opposite side of the bank and dock safely for the vehicles to disembark and continue with their military objectives. Furthermore, a simulated crisis included the movement of many personnel and combat vehicles across Polish territory. The movement of troops is a crucial part of the exercise, said Wisniewski, especially in a situation like today where we have large formations of troops involved, with 20,000 plus military personnel and 3,500 pieces of equipment. At this point, you would be forgiven for questioning the sheer numbers involved here, over 20,000 troops and 3,500 pieces of military hardware. More statement of intent than a standard military drill. Even the least cynical amongst you must find it hard not to class such a large-scale exercise as an act of intimidation. To others, it closely resembles a warm-up before the deployment of military personnel from NATO countries to Ukrainian territory, even if they wouldn't, at this stage, be taking an active role in combat operations. All of this was corroborated in a recent statement by the Polish Ministry of Defense. While the exercises are defensive and not directed against any state, they are deemed to be a demonstration of the ability to counter any aggressive policies and proactive activities of the Russian Federation. Another broadside in Moscow's direction, if ever there was one. But perhaps there is a deeper underlying symbolism involved here, one that goes further than the military exercises on Polish soil, for these drills took place only around 100 kilometers away from Poland's border with the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic Sea. And again, that is something that would be a huge cause of concern for a Moscow almost obsessively paranoid about any potential incursions into its territories. Now, this area, the Suwalki Gap, or Suwalki Corridor, as it's sometimes referred to, has been of great historical importance for many years. Moreover, it acts as a choke point that could well play an incredibly vital role if Putin decides to escalate his military aims in Eastern and Central Europe. But where exactly is the Suwalki Gap, and why is it so important? The Suwalki Gap is an area around the border between Lithuania and Poland that's sparsely populated, to say the least. It represents the shortest path between Belarus and the aforementioned Russian exclave of Kaliningrad Oblast on the Polish side of the border. Named after the Polish town of Suwalki, this choke point has been of great strategic and military significance ever since Poland and the Baltic states joined NATO. The border between Poland and Lithuania was formed after the Suwalki Agreement of 1920, but it was of little importance in the interwar period, 1918 to 39. At the time, the Polish lands stretched farther northeast. During the Cold War, however, Lithuania was part of the Soviet Union, and Communist Poland was a member of the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact alliance. The eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact hardened borders that cut through the shortest land route between Kaliningrad, Russian territory isolated from the mainland, and Belarus, Russia's ally. From that geographical information alone, it's clear to see why the Suwalki Gap is seen as such a key location should the war take an unexpected turn. In fact, an article from Politico shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine went a step further, claiming that the area is the most dangerous place on Earth. Why? Well, Western military planners warn that the Suwalki Gap would likely be one of the Russian president's first targets, were he ever to choose to ramp up the war in Ukraine into a confrontation to end all confrontations with NATO. At present, all is quiet in the area, but for how long though? Ramūnas Sepatuskas, commander of a local company of Lithuania's Riflemen's Union, a voluntary militia with roots stretching back more than a century, is monitoring the situation in the border region with growing unease and concern. For many, the Suwalki Gap is Lithuania's Achilles heel. Some think there's no point in attacking us, but it must be noted that this is a direct route to Kaliningrad, he said. If they're able to overcome Ukraine, it's possible that the next blow would fall here. And therein lies the rub, and perhaps a little more light on Macron's statements, as well as just why US, French, and British troops might just be ready to enter the fray in Ukraine. In February, Russia scored one of, if not the, biggest victories of the increasingly attritional conflict so far, the taking of the hugely important strategic Donbas city of Avdiivka. The fact that fighting, whether intermittent or heavy, has been raging since 2014 only underscores the significance of the win for Moscow. Even more worryingly, Ukrainian troops are running out of everything from effective radar equipment and military hardware to basic ammunition on the ground. But a restock of supplies is slow in coming, across the board. In an interview with CBS and published by The Hill in March 2024, the beleaguered Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made the following statement: "We don't have rounds, artillery rounds. We don't know what will be tomorrow. That's why we have to prepare." Since the beginning of the conflict, Ukraine has received unprecedented levels of military aid. According to the Council on Foreign Relations from February 2024, the US alone has pledged over $75 billion so far. Naturally, at the start of the conflict, the political goodwill was there for all to see. Citizens in Western nations in particular were appalled at Putin's act of aggression and fully backed their government's actions. Now, over 2 years down the line, people have become increasingly war-weary, especially now they are being bombarded with images of Israel's brutal war with Hamas. And this has had an inevitable knock-on effect. Back in December 23, US President Joe Biden encountered incredible difficulties in getting approval for a new military aid package for Ukraine passed through Congress. In a report from the BBC, there was huge resistance from Senate Republicans to the new $61 billion package, despite an unnamed Ukrainian official stating that failure to secure more US aid would mean a very high possibility that the war would be lost to Russia. Of course, this is the outcome no one in the West wants to see, evidenced by Macron's comments quoted at the top of the video, but the plain facts of the conflict cannot be disputed. Ukraine has received huge military backing from the West, but it now looks as if the country is slowly but surely losing the war. So is the solution yet more funding, the transport of more military hardware, bigger and better rockets and guns, more support on the ground, and more economic sanctions against Russia? In an ideal world, perhaps that would be the easiest solution, all of the above. But no war can go on in perpetuity, just as no government, no matter how well-meaning or righteous the cause they champion, has unlimited coffers. Hence, Ukraine's main allies find themselves in an invidious position where direct action might be the only way to proceed. A point emphasized by Phillips O'Brien, Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. The issue of sending European forces to help Ukraine was never one to be dismissed, he said. Europe is now faced with a terrible dilemma, watching Ukraine potentially run out of ammunition or stepping in and helping Ukraine more directly. Zelensky has hinted as much himself, warning that the war could escalate to Europe. The US is helping Ukraine and we are grateful for their support, but the United States don't have the war going on. But it can come to Europe and to the United States of America. It can come very quickly to Europe. But are the leaders of countries like the US, France, and Britain really ready to act? Do they genuinely fear that a Russian victory in Ukraine may be only the start of a wider conflict in Europe and beyond? And were the drills that took place in Poland back in March actually preparations for a special military operation of their own? If so, it brings us all the way back to the Suwalki Gap. As stated, it's the only way to get by road or rail from Poland and Central Europe to the Baltic states, which are arguably NATO's most exposed members. A Russian move to seize control of the corridor may seem beyond the realm of possibility at the present time, as it would explicitly involve an attack on NATO territory, automatically triggering a US military response. Why? Article 5 of the NATO Charter. The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. But will Putin be cowed by Article 5 in the way much of the world assumes? Will it continue to act as a deterrent when the stakes are so much higher now? That's a question that can't be answered at this stage, but considering the Russian leader's complete disregard for international law, it would pay for the West to prepare now for the worst-case scenarios. However, the sticking point seems to be the very real concerns that increased military assistance to Ukraine, meaning direct troop deployment of the kind Macron threatened in Paris back in February, might paint the West as co-combatants in the eyes of the international law Putin himself is so happy to flout. And there's no way that any Western government, be it Biden, Macron, or UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, could risk being cast as the aggressors. History would never forgive them. If they did proceed regardless, it might give Putin the excuse he needs, and probably wants, for lashing out and launching new military offensives of his own. Namely, the Kremlin may see an increased threat to Kaliningrad and seize the Suwalki corridor to create a land bridge to the exclave. Moreover, Kaliningrad is now home to substantial Russian combat forces, including the Russian Baltic Fleet, advanced air defenses, and mobile nuclear-capable Iskander-M missiles. For that reason, Russia is hugely sensitive to any threats, real or imagined or invented, to its control of the non-contiguous territory, and might risk escalation if it misinterpreted NATO's actions near Kaliningrad. Naturally, any attempt by Putin to seize the corridor would mean an attack on Lithuania or Poland, or both, and a direct war between NATO and Russia. And like we said, this would at best be strategically unwise and, at worst, a precursor to World War III. But time and time again, Putin has kept the West second-guessing. There's nothing to suggest that a potential conflict over the Suwalki Gap would be any different. For now, the world can only look on with bated breath. Make no mistake though, the clock is ticking. And perhaps the country looking most concernedly at the hands traversing that metaphorical clock face is, of course, Poland. In the 20th century, the Polish people suffered terribly at the hands of two of history's most brutal dictators. In one direction, they had Hitler's all-conquering Wehrmacht, in the other, Stalin's vengeful Red Army. One intent on invading and seizing power, the other to rape, pillage, and forcibly indoctrinate the populace with their communist ideology. Put quite simply, the country became one big battlefield, with its major towns and cities being reduced to nothing more than rubble in the process. Understandably, Warsaw never wanted to be in that position again. To protect itself going into the 21st century and beyond, Poland has built one of the most modern and best-equipped armies, not just in Europe, but the whole world. Indeed, the defense minister Mariusz Błaszczak claimed that his country would soon have the most powerful land forces in Europe. Many would argue that the country already has. At the time of the making of this video, Poland has more tanks and howitzers than Germany and is on course to have a much larger army, with a target of 300,000 troops by 2035, compared with Germany's current 170,000. In terms of troop numbers, the military is about 150,000 strong, with 30,000 belonging to a new territorial defense force set up in 2017. These consist of weekend soldiers who undergo 16 days of training, followed up by refresher courses. Initially sneered at, Ukraine's success in using mobile militia equipped with anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles now makes the idea seem much more sensible. The list could go on, and it's made Poland a powerful force to be reckoned with on the global stage, to the extent that a senior US Army official sees the country playing a crucial role in supporting Ukraine and in shoring up NATO defenses in the Baltics. Poland has become our most important partner in continental Europe. So, would Putin be willing to open up another military front and launch an all-out attack on a country with such fearsome military resources at its disposal and such powerful allies? The ramifications have already been set out in this video if the ultimate answer is none the clearer. To come full circle, Macron's threats of Western troop deployment were roundly criticized by the rest of the world. For some, they were unnecessarily aggressive. For others, reckless and ill-advised. Already the situation in Ukraine is on a knife edge and tightrope combined. With Putin seemingly happy to play the long game now, what will ultimately happen in the short to medium term is difficult to predict. In recent interviews, Zelensky has said that he fully expects the Russians to launch another full-blown offensive in the spring, with May being the most likely date. Meanwhile, predictions coming out of Moscow, both from those opposed and those firmly behind Putin's leadership, suggest that the war could drag on for another 5 to 7 years. But maybe the key factor in both the short and longer term will be the outcome of the US presidential election in November 2024. If Donald Trump were to be re-elected, it could have disastrous ramifications for Kyiv. Whether that would mean a significant reduction in military aid or the end of all financial and military support altogether is yet to be seen. Back in 2023, when asked about the Ukraine conflict, Trump was in a conciliatory mood. "I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I would tell Zelensky no more. You've got to make a deal. I would tell Putin, if you don't make a deal, we're going to give him, Zelensky, a lot." Since then, the former president's tone has changed. Worryingly, in a CNN report from March 24, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán is quoted as saying in an interview with M1 Broadcast, he, Trump, has a very clear vision. He says the following: first, he will not give a single penny for the Russo-Ukrainian war. That's why the war will end, because it's obvious that Ukraine cannot stand on its own 2 feet. If that transpires, then the whole nature of the war will, of course, be turned on its head. So perhaps the biggest question facing the likes of the US, France and Britain is just when exactly the time for procrastinating is over. To their credit, the governments of each of those countries took decisive action from the outset. They pledged huge amounts of money to bolster the Ukrainian war effort and implemented some of the harshest economic sanctions against Russia ever seen. But still, it hasn't been enough, not by a long shot. In addition to the significant military breakthroughs referenced earlier in the video, Putin has also managed to absorb the economic blows associated with the sanctions by exporting huge amounts of gas and oil to Asia, most notably to China and India, if at a drastically reduced price. In addition, military expansion in the prized Arctic region has carved a lucrative new trade route that could prove decisive in years to come. Economically, Russia looks more than capable of funding the war for as long as necessary. In fact, some business experts are of the opinion that the Russian economy is so reliant upon the war now that Moscow simply can't afford to pull out of Ukraine for the foreseeable future. Perhaps even more worryingly are rumors that Russia has been holding back some of its more advanced, modern military capabilities. In a report from Reuters from February of this year, Putin claimed that 95% of Russia's strategic nuclear forces had been modernized and that the Air Force has just taken delivery of 4 new supersonic nuclear-capable bombers. If that's true, it only adds to Zelensky's woes and puts even more pressure on his allies. With a significant number of US, French and British troops assembling close to the theater of war, and Moscow looking to make another decisive move on the geopolitical chessboard, the future couldn't be more uncertain. Whether an increasingly unlikely diplomatic solution can be found, or whether a change in the White House will force every nation's hand, is yet to be seen. But if Macron's words are anything to go by, Western troops could well be mobilized and ready to enter Ukraine sooner than anybody could ever have imagined or feared. Now we're coming to the end of the video, it's time to ask you what you think about the potential Western troop deployment in Ukraine. Was February's statement of intent no more than an empty threat from Macron to see exactly how Putin would react? Or do you think the conflict, now in its 3rd calendar year, has reached a stage where Western intervention is all but inevitable? After all, the military aid packages from NATO countries in particular are unsustainable in the long term, and with Putin's recent landslide re-election and some Russian political experts predicting a much longer war than anticipated, the time for the West to act may well be upon us. If not, Russian aggression could see the country take decisive steps into Central and maybe even Western Europe. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out why Poland would destroy Russia in a war, or click this other video instead. How do we really know what's powerful and what's just show? This question gets pretty interesting when you look at China's military growth under Xi Jinping since 2013. They're now rolling with the world's 2nd biggest military budget and might even spend 4% of their GDP on defense. For a somewhat overlooked military force in the 2000s, China has jumped up to having the biggest navy around, complete with modern aircraft carriers and a bunch of high-tech gear. But here's the thing, is China's military muscle as strong as it looks, or is it overhyped? Could it be more of a paper tiger than a real powerhouse? In this video, we're going to dig into these questions and try to figure out what China's military is really made of. Russia's invasion of Ukraine naturally prompted a second look at the supposedly new and improved Chinese military. For years under Putin's rule, Western experts feared the supposedly modern military Moscow was building, only to find that it stumbled forward in Ukraine through sheer mass, taking hundreds of thousands of casualties in exchange for minimal territorial gains over 2 years. Could something similar be at work in China? Was it another example of an authoritarian country trying to look stronger than it really was? Modernizing China's military has been one of Xi Jinping's top priorities since taking power, but over the second half of 2023, he still saw the necessity of going through another purge. 9 generals from the People's Liberation Army were fired. 3 of those were serving in the PLA's prized rocket force, which oversees China's vast stockpile of conventional missiles and its nuclear arsenal. Another of the sacked officers was the naval commander responsible for the South China Sea. Even China's defense minister Li Shangfu was fired and replaced. Other sacked officers were responsible for procurement of supplies. Military equipment suppliers have also been on the chopping block. Neither Xi nor sources close to him have given a reason for the purge, but as early as December 30th, analysts guessed that it involved corruption over the acquisition of military equipment. As we've seen in Ukraine, such centers of corruption will prove disastrous for a fighting force in the field. Perhaps it shouldn't be surprising that Xi became so concerned. In January 2024, some of the clouds began to lift. American intelligence sources revealed that China's rocket force had taken to fielding missiles filled with water rather than fuel, and that some of the country's silos were constructed with improper lids, which would prevent missiles stored in them from being launched. To make matters worse for the Chinese military, US intelligence suggested that corruption in the rocket force and the broader PLA was so damaging that Xi would need to recalculate whether China would be able to make any military moves in the foreseeable future. In its official New Year's Day statement released in Mandarin, the PLA said it was in a battle against corruption and reminded its personnel to stay vigilant. The reports from American intelligence did not state which missiles had been filled with water, but either way, the PLA rocket force's prestige has taken a big blow, which is dangerous for China. Much of its military buildup and approach to deterrence has involved the acquisition of thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles as part of its anti-access area denial strategy for a confrontation with the United States. If it cannot effectively carry out this strategy, it cannot contest the US military around the First Island chain. Tom Shughart, a former officer in the US Navy, now with the Center for a New American Strategy, accurately called the rocket force China's crown jewel and a center of gravity for the Chinese military. For China, this is the force that must be the most effective in carrying out its mission, and yet it might be one of the centers of corruption. Yao Cheng, a former lieutenant colonel with the PLAAF who defected to the United States in 2016, discussed the extent of corruption in the Chinese military with Radio Free Asia after the recent reports emerged. The budget for dinners and gifts is taken from the equipment department. Some military departments have no money, and if they need money, their chief has to allocate some from the equipment budget. The equipment budget would have been sufficient, but not after being misappropriated. When I was in the military, we would drain fuel from aircraft fuel tanks for cooking, which burns green and has no smell at all. When we would eat hot pot, we would take out the solid fuel in the missiles piece by piece because there were insufficient supplies. I would often go along to the armory and ask them for a small round piece of solid fuel when we wanted to have hot pot. Unfortunately for China, the problems in its military go far deeper than its vaunted rocket force. China's new navy is another item of pride for its military. Under Xi, China has steadily grown to a relative level of sea power that it has arguably not seen since the days of the Ming treasure fleets under Zheng He in the 15th century. China now has the world's largest navy by number of vessels, with 426 units in its fleet as of January 2024. Among these are 3 aircraft carriers, the Liaoning, the Shandong, and the Fujian. The Fujian is a step above the other 2, as it's the first Chinese aircraft carrier to use a catapult system, which allows its planes to be launched faster than the ski jump system used on its other carriers, which are based on Russian designs. The Liaoning is in fact the sister ship of Russia's troubled Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier. The Fujian is only the 2nd ship in the world to have an electromagnetic catapult, coming after the USS Gerald R. Ford. This is a big step forward because traditional steam catapults require more maintenance than an electromagnetic one. The Fujian's arrival was therefore a symbol to both China and the wider world about its growing naval capabilities. Although the new aircraft carriers represent a significant improvement in China's navy, they are not all they're cracked up to be. The aircraft carrier is useless unless there are planes to fly from it. This is a problem for the PLAN, as China has a serious shortage of trained naval aviators. As a sign of its commitment to naval aviation, China established the Naval Aeronautical University in Yantai in its Shandong province in 2017. The new institution meant that the PLAN would be emphasizing training naval pilots on its own, rather than continuing with the previous practice of picking them out of the PLAAF's ranks. Unfortunately for Beijing, China's lack of institutional experience has been quick to show itself, and the new institution has lacked the necessary equipment to bring it up to par with American standards. One of China's biggest problems is that it lacks a plane dedicated to training aviators in taking off and landing on a carrier. The current plane for this purpose is the JL-9G, which was first unveiled in 2011. This plane can't be used to simulate emergency landings on a carrier because it flies too slowly and because the plane itself is too light. Because of these design flaws, China's would-be naval aviators are limited to training on land-based simulated carriers. China has only one carrier-based fighter, the Shenyang J-15 Flying Shark, but only about 60 of them have been built. It's also a much heavier aircraft than the JL-9G, with an empty weight of 17.5 tons, compared to the JL-9G's 7.8. The J-15 has a top speed of Mach 2.4 compared to the JL-9G's Mach 1.05. The differences between the two planes make China's current training regimen less than ideal for fielding pilots for the PLAN. The result is that China has had a tough time fielding a roster of 200 pilots to operate 130 aircraft for its aircraft carriers. The Fujian in particular has another problem. Although it resembles American aircraft carriers in some important ways, its insides are much different. Unlike them, it's not powered by nuclear propulsion. Instead, the Fujian is powered by steam turbines and boilers. As a result, the Fujian lacks the range and operational durability of its American rivals. It will not be able to stay at sea as long as they can. This is less of a problem when China expects a confrontation to take place close to its home waters. However, Xi Jinping has made building a world-class military by the middle of the century one of his highest priorities. For greater power projection capable of competing with the United States on a global level, the Fujian falls short, even if it could adequately staff its pilots and aircraft roster. The weaknesses in the Fujian and China's previous two aircraft carriers are partly why efforts are underway to build a fourth aircraft carrier, the Type 004. This one will be nuclear-powered. In late 2023 and early 2024, the Fujian began its sea trials, signaling that it was almost ready for frontline service. In February 2024, China was seen testing an unspecified carrier-based aircraft that a few observers have called the J-35, which would be China's second fifth-generation aircraft. We will need to wait and see how this plane could change the situation. Even so, China still lags significantly behind the United States in naval aviation experience, and that is a gap harder to fill than the number of aircraft carriers. China has also made significant improvements to its air force in the past 10 to 15 years. Prior to that, it was often operating obsolete second-generation aircraft. This is no longer the case, with the PLAAF now relying on the fourth-generation J-10 and J-16 and the fifth-generation Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon. The J-20 in particular is an item of pride for the Chinese brass. It's the third fifth-generation aircraft to be produced in significant numbers. American war planners respect it enough to make giving the F-35 its Block 4 upgrades a high priority. One expert said that he thought a contest between the current F-35 and J-20 would be uncomfortably close. The J-20 had its maiden flight in 2011, came into service in 2017, and recently got a new engine, the domestically produced WS-15, which is expected to enter service in 2025. It had previously used the Russian-made AL-31 engine, developed for the fourth-generation Su-34, which limited its capabilities. The new engine is expected to allow the J-20 to fly at supersonic speed without afterburners for extended durations and to provide greater thrust and maneuverability. Aviation experts expect the WS-15 to make the J-20 the world's leading aircraft in thrust output until sixth-generation fighters like America's NGAD arrive on the scene. The J-20 has other formidable capabilities. It can engage targets from beyond visual range, as it comes armed with long-range missiles like the 200km PL-15 and the purported 300km PL-21. The J-20's exact radar system is unknown, but it is believed to be an AESA radar that possibly features stolen technology from the F-35. Like the Lightning II, the J-20 mounts electro-optical and infrared sensors on its frame to provide 360-degree coverage for sensor fusion and can likely share this data with friendly assets elsewhere. If so, there is potential for the J-20 to act as an airborne early warning and command and control plane, leaving out the need for specialized, large and slow aircraft to perform this purpose. Despite the J-20s being a clear advancement in China's domestic aviation and arms industries, even some Chinese experts say their new plane is not up to America's best fighters. One analyst in Beijing's Wang security think tank mentioned that the F-35's XA-100 engine is at least a decade ahead of the WS-15. Some international aviation experts report that the J-20 lacks maneuverability, which would make it vulnerable in a dogfight with enemy fighters. Others disagree, but this is of secondary importance. The worst thing is that some aviation experts also question whether the J-20 is a true fifth-generation aircraft, a true stealth fighter. While acknowledged as being stealthier than Russia's Su-57 Felon, the F-22 and F-35 likely have significantly lower radar cross-sections than the J-20, which would give them a big advantage in a confrontation. Like the Su-57, the J-20 has its highest-performing stealth features concentrated in the front of the plane, while comparatively lacking from the sides and rear. This might be fine if the J-20 approaches its targets from the front, but if it needs to turn or maneuver, it is likely significantly more visible and imperiled. In contrast, the F-35 reportedly has the radar cross-section of a metal golf ball at about 0.001 square meters. If so, this would likely give the F-35 an advantage between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude in stealth compared to the J-20. The F-22 would also be stealthier than the J-20 on this assessment, although the USAF brass acknowledged it is less stealthy than the F-35. The J-20's radar, while an advancement, is also not all it's cracked up to be. Because the J-20 began with the JXX program of the 1990s, its radar is an early Chinese AESA radar. Although this is a big step up compared to China's previous fighter aircraft and likely gives the J-20 enhanced situational awareness and detection against targets with low cross-sections, it's still hard-pressed to match the F-35's AN/APG-81, much less the coming AN/APG-85, and likely can't replicate the F-35's flying supercomputer attributes. Although we cannot know for certain unless we see an actual confrontation, it's likely that America's fifth-generation fighters will be able to avoid detection and shoot the J-20 down before it can spot them. The J-20 is also probably at a disadvantage against the F-22 in a dogfight. China's newest bomber may have more unrealistic claims. Since China has tried to evolve its military into one capable of strategic power projection rather than a fighting force more suited to defense, it has also seen a need to upgrade its bomber force. In 2016, it revealed a new bomber, the Jian H-20, which it sought to be an answer to America's stealth bombers, the B-2 and coming B-21, and the final piece of its nuclear triad. Initial reports suggested that the H-20 would have a range of 10,000 kilometers. This is a range greater than the B-2, and one which would put all American and Allied targets in the Indo-Pacific region in danger. It could also put Hawaii in danger, and if the bomber took an Arctic flight route, such a range would be sufficient to reach the 49 other states, that is without aerial refueling. The H-20 has other reportedly impressive features. It may be able to carry a payload between 10 and 20 tons, in line with the B-2's 18. Chinese sources claim that the payload will far exceed the B-2 with a 45-ton limit. The new bomber will also supposedly carry 4 stealth or hypersonic missiles. The H-20 seems to be a plane designed for deep penetration missions, relying on stealth features rather than speed or maneuverability to get within an enemy's air defense zone. The bomber's exterior appears to have a stealth design with a blended wing body, embedded engine, and lack of vertical structures. The fact that this purported design looks like a knockoff of the B-2 reveals China's intentions for it. It should also come with a new AESA radar to better identify threats and high-priority targets, and for improved electronic warfare attributes. The H-20, if it were to come online, would be a big improvement over China's current go-to bomber, the X-6, which is based on the Soviet Tu-16 Badger that originated in the early 1950s. But there are problems for Beijing. One of them is that this bomber has yet to fly and seems to be behind schedule. In July 2022, Chinese media sources reported that the H-20 was close to ready for its maiden flight. This has still not occurred as of February 2024. Plans are in place for the bomber to be operational before the end of the decade, but China has yet to even publicly unveil it. The most anyone has seen of it is on 2 videos. The first was a 2018 video released by the H-20's manufacturer, the Aviation Industry Corporation of China, AVIC. The footage revealed an airplane underneath a large drape. The second came in a PLAAF recruiting ad in 2021, which revealed a previously unknown flying wing-type aircraft reflected on the visor of a pilot. Perhaps there are reasons for its lack of a maiden flight. A plane with the H-20's purported wing design would need to be much larger than thought in order to carry a 45-ton payload. Meanwhile, to carry its large payload over its supposed long range, the H-20 would need to carry much more fuel than a typical bomber. When reporting on the H-20 in its assessment of Chinese air power in 2020, the Pentagon believed it would have more modest features, such as an 8,500-kilometer range and a 10-ton payload. The Pentagon concedes that the H-20 is a significant leap from China's current bomber capability, but believes that the claims some have made of it are too unrealistic. In terms of stealth, the H-20 will be much less detectable than China's traditional bombers. However, its design may not be as good as the B-2 or B-21. The bomber may be able to adjust its wings from angled to straight in order to improve its stealth. If not, the angled protrusion will make it less stealthy. Even the presence of an adjustable seam for the wings would make the plane more detectable than if it had a smooth design. The wing configuration, while a leap forward, still suggests that China is learning when it comes to engineering stealth aircraft. There is no doubt that China's military has come a long way in the past 25 years, particularly in the past 10 under Xi Jinping. It's closed the gap in capability with the United States, but its problems only reveal how far behind it was to begin with. China still lacks experience in creating a combined arms military with cutting-edge technology. It would be dangerous to assume that most of China's missiles are filled with water, as we saw what its rocket force, air force, and navy are capable of in exercises off Taiwan in 2022 and 23. However, as recent events have made clear, China's military also suffers from internal problems. Corruption will likely continue within the PLA's ranks. Though the pay structure has improved, officers are still not paid well, and military expenditures lack transparency. Realities like this make double timing a natural response. China's long-term demographic problems will also pose a problem for its military. With an aging population, it will have increasing difficulties in recruiting new personnel. The PLA has presented a bold and aggressive new face to the world, but behind the facade, it still has many shortcomings if it plans on challenging the US military for global dominance, as Xi Jinping wants it to do. What do you think about China's supposed latest and greatest gear and the corruption scandal that broke out between late 2023 and early 24? What else might China be hyping, and what other problems might Xi Jinping's China dream have in manifesting into reality? Don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. By the end of 2012, American cybersecurity experts understood that there was a rat in their midst. To find it and its home base, Kyle Wilhoit, another expert in the field, attempted something of a social experiment. He built a water plant using advanced industrial techniques in the town of Arnold, Missouri. Actually, he didn't. There was nothing there except virtual signals sending fake data back and forth. Once the plant was connected to the internet, malicious actors attacked it from all sides, including some located in North Korea and Russia. However, the most sophisticated attack came from exactly the source Wilhoit expected. His server was bombarded with a series of knowledgeable emails with legitimate-looking attachments. However, these were phishing emails with malware embedded in these innocuous documents. Wilhoit downloaded the malware. Again, as he expected, his data was being stolen. He was soon on the chase, tracking where the information was being trafficked. Fortunately for him, the attacker made no effort to hide its point of origin. It was a server in Shanghai, China. Wilhoit not only tracked the location, but was able to infiltrate the server too, and it was full of government and corporate secrets, revealing the largest and most successful cybernetic espionage campaign in history. Wilhoit had confirmed all of the suspicions that had been going on for years. He had uncovered Operation Shady Rat. In this video, we'll take a look at China's Operation Shady Rat and its military espionage in general. We will also see how, despite the undoubted success of its campaign to steal American military secrets, it's failed to copy them with complete efficiency. But what secrets did China manage to steal from the US, and how was it ultimately stopped in completing this mission? Stick around to find out. A scandal in the Chinese military may have exposed some of its problems in late 2023 and early 2024, but there is still no doubt that it's much more capable than it was when Xi Jinping took power in November 2012. Building a world-class military that can contest America's traditional superiority in the Indo-Pacific region is one of his highest priorities. Xi will stop at nothing to ensure that he achieves that goal by the year 2049, including outright robbery. The then outgoing United States Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, described China's approach to intellectual property theft as rob, replicate, and replace. China robs US companies of their intellectual property, replicates the technology, and then replaces the US firms in the global marketplace. China has attempted the same approach to military technology. The two are part of the same campaign through Beijing's strategy of military-civil fusion. According to the US State Department, the strategy aims to bring down barriers between commercial and military technological applications. The robbery of civilian technology, particularly in the emerging field of artificial intelligence, is something China wishes to apply to improving the People's Liberation Army as much as it wants to use it to replace Western firms at the center of global commerce. Espionage is therefore an all-encompassing strategy for the Chinese in their ambitions to emerge as the world's leading technological and military powerhouse. State sponsorship of hackers is one of the most important tools of espionage in China's arsenal. This is the origin of the hacker group alternatively known as APT-1, Comment Crew, Comment Panda, GIF89A, Byzantine Candor, and several other Chinese language names. The attacks by this group are known collectively as China's Operation Shady Rat. APT-1's known activity began in 2006 and first targeted a South Korean construction company. Targets since then have ranged from commercial enterprises, government agencies, non-profit groups, the United Nations, and even the International Olympic Committee. These seemingly separate attacks were first identified as an organized phenomenon by Dmitry Alperovich, the VP of Threat Research at McAfee, in August 2011. By then, he had confirmed over 70 targets, 49 of which were in the United States. The method was the same, a series of spear phishing emails sent to those with a good level of access in the target entity. These emails closely emulated colleagues or other people who were knowledgeable about the entity being targeted. The only giveaway that something might not be right was that the emails sometimes seemed to be written by someone who had less than perfect command of the English language. These emails would contain an attachment that housed malware, according to Alperovich. That malware will execute and initiate a backdoor communication channel to the command and control web server and interpret the instructions encoded in the hidden comments embedded in the web page code. This will quickly be followed by live intruders jumping onto the infected machine and proceeding to quickly escalate privileges and move laterally within the organization to establish new persistent footholds via additional compromised machines running implant malware, as well as targeting for quick exfiltration the key data they came for. Crucially, Alperovich identified 13 defense contractors that had been targeted by 2011. In 2013, cybersecurity professionals working with Mandiant, a subsidiary of Google, gave the group its name and discovered what it really was. A more recent report in December 2021 followed up on this conclusion. APT-1 was actually Unit 61398 in the People's Liberation Army. It and APT-1 are identical in location near Shanghai, mission, and capabilities. This unit is known to carry out information and electronic warfare, ranging from cybernetic efforts to more mundane tasks like posting propaganda on social media. As early as 2009, it became known that stealing military secrets was one of APT-1's highest priorities. A young Chinese hacker first got on the unit's trail through discovering that his client, an American defense contractor, had found malicious programs on its computer network. APT-1's attempts to steal military technology go from large pieces of hardware that we will look into in a moment to far less spectacular components. For example, known targets have included 29 chemical companies and 19 other firms that make materials for military use. The theft of this information gave China data on how to construct the finished products it was attempting to steal. The similarity of many of China's new weapons to American designs leaves no doubt that the work of APT-1 and other Chinese hackers has found its way into the PLA. Examples abound. One of the most obvious is the CASC Rainbow drone. This UAV is almost an exact replica of the American MQ-9 Reaper. The Rainbow can carry 6 weapons, a payload between 250 and 340 kilograms, and has a ceiling of about 5 kilometers. Likewise, the Reaper can carry 6 weapons, has a 380 kilogram payload capacity, and comes with a ceiling of about 15 kilometers. China's HJ-12 Red Arrow portable anti-tank weapon is another blatant example, as it's almost an exact knockoff of the American FGM-148 Javelin design. The Red Arrow has an effective range from 75 to 2,000 meters, extendable to 4,000 meters with TV guidance, can penetrate 800 mm of armor, and launches a tandem heat-guided warhead by infrared or TV imaging. The Javelin has the exact same attributes. Then there's China's Harbin Z-20 helicopter, which looks almost exactly the same as the American UH-60 Black Hawk. It has a length of 20 meters, a 16-meter main rotor diameter, and a 5.3-meter height. It can carry up to 10 tons and may be armed with machine guns, rocket pods, and various missiles. Likewise, the Black Hawk can be armed with similar weapons. It's slightly smaller but has otherwise similar dimensions and can carry a little more weight at 11 tons, but there's no doubt that the Chinese design was inspired by the American one. China has not been as successful in creating exact replicas of other weapons stolen from the United States, though. However, the stolen American weapon designs have nevertheless been critical in strengthening China's military. In a move that left little doubt about Beijing's intentions, Lockheed Martin was one of the first targets for Operation Shady Rat. Lockheed Martin is the manufacturer of both of America's fifth-generation fighter aircraft, the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. As early as 2007, APT-1 compromised Lockheed Martin's network in a major way. Not coincidentally, China's first fifth-generation fighter, the Chengdu J-20, had its maiden flight only 4 years later. Another fifth-generation fighter in development, the J-31, had its first flight in 2012. At first, the US military denied that it and its contractors had suffered a major data theft, but documents later leaked by Edward Snowden confirmed that the Chinese hackers had indeed stolen sensitive information on the F-35. The documents revealed that Chinese efforts particularly focused on getting the plane's radar design and engine schematics, among other secret materials. Terabytes worth of data on the Lightning II were taken. The hackers with APT-1 also succeeded in stealing information on the F-22, the B-2 Spirit bomber, space lasers, missile navigation and tracking systems, anti-air missile designs, and material on nuclear submarines. These were only the more notable examples of over 30,000 hacking incidents, which included 500 significant intrusions into the US Department of Defense, over 1,600 DoD computers compromised, and 600,000 user accounts infiltrated. 50 terabytes of data were stolen, equivalent to 5 times the total information content in the Library of Congress. The damages were estimated to be at least $100 million. The Chinese government has denied any involvement in these incidents. At the time of its maiden flight, aviation experts noted certain similarities between the Chengdu J-20 and the F-22. While the Chinese plane is bigger and heavier, suggesting an emphasis on long range and heavy weapon loads, these authorities noted that the stealth body shaping of the J-20 was like that of the F-22. Both planes had flat body sides aligned with the canted tails, clean wing junction bodies, and sharp chine lines around their forward fuselages. Notably, they noted that the cant angles were greater than that seen on the F-35, and the J-20's frameless canopy was similar to that of the F-22. The weapons bays were also noted to be like the F-22, with the J-20's landing gear retracting into body side bays. However, even back then, these aviation experts saw that the J-20 might have been a less than perfect replica of the F-22 if stealth was what its engineers had in mind. Notably, the aircraft's rear features like underwing actuator fairings, axis-symmetric engine exhausts, and the plane's ventral fins were suboptimal for stealth designs. Writing for Aviation Week in January 2011, Bill Sweetman came to a predictive conclusion. There are 2 possible explanations for this. Either the aircraft seen here is the first step toward an operational design, or China's requirements do not place as much stress on rear aspect signatures. The latter has proven to be the case, whether through China's intention or not. While the J-20 is a major step forward for Chinese aviation, most of the plane's stealth features are indeed concentrated on the front. The sides and rear of the plane are comparatively lacking, meaning that if it needs to turn, the J-20 is much more detectable by radar. The J-20 also has a few features of the F-35. It has an active electronically scanned array (AESA) radar, potentially boasting some stolen technology from the F-35's AN/APG-81, which makes some experts believe that it has the potential to act as an airborne early warning command and control (AWACS) aircraft. It mounts electro-optical and infrared sensors on its frame to provide 360-degree situational awareness to the pilot, which can be shared with other friendly assets. Despite the stolen technology, though, the J-20's radar is still likely an early AESA radar, originating from the JXX program in the early 1990s, one which cannot quite match the flying supercomputer capability of the F-35. Some Chinese security experts have also quietly admitted that even the new engine for the J-20, the domestically designed and manufactured WS-15, is at least a decade behind the F-35's Pratt & Whitney F-135. China's infiltration of other American defense contractors is also made clear by the advent of the stealth strategic bomber it has in the works, the Zhan H-20. Although this bomber has never been put on a public display and has missed its maiden flight scheduled for 2022, available evidence from a PLAAF recruiting ad that came out in 2021 suggests that its design is similar to the B-2. Like the Spirit, the bomber's design seems to be based around using stealth rather than speed to penetrate an enemy's air defense zone. It's flying a wing design with a blended wing body, embedded engines, and a lack of vertical features, all of which makes it less detectable to radar. As for its own radar, the H-20 will likely boast an improved Chinese AESA system to better observe lower detectable threats and identify targets at longer ranges. The internal and external design of the revealed H-21 seem to confirm that China has infiltrated the B-2's manufacturer, Northrop Grumman, and stolen data on the Spirit, as the Snowden documents suggest. American intelligence officials believe that China's stealth bomber program began in the early 2000s, with Chinese aviation experts studying the feasibility of both flying wing and supersonic delta wing versions. The early 2000s seems to have been a time before the advent of APT-1 and Operation Shady Rat, but another date provides a clue about the influence of the PLA hackers on the effort to create the H-20. The project team at the Xi'an Aircraft Industrial Corporation's 603 Aircraft Design Institute seems to have settled on a subsonic flying wing aircraft frame with 4 engines in 2011, years after the launch of Operation Shady Rat. It is possible that the PLAAF and XAC originally began with the idea of a supersonic delta wing bomber, but after receiving APT-1's data, went with the B-2 knockoff idea instead. The dimensions for the two planes seem similar. The H-20 even likely uses 4 engines, just like the B-2. Around the same time as this change, the USAF began laying plans for the coming replacement for the B-2, the B-21 Raider. It's unknown if any of the details on the new bomber were stolen by China's state-sponsored hackers, but Operation Shady Rat was designed not only to retrieve existing data, but to keep malware on infected computer systems to steal future data. It's possible that APT-1 had malware buried deep within Northrop Grumman's network and lifted data on the B-21 as it was conceived in the early 2010s. However, despite China's clearly successful theft of information related to at least one of America's stealth bombers, the H-20 is likely not a perfect knockoff of the B-2, although we cannot be certain until the plane is actually revealed to the public. The H-20 has a few features that seem to make it more detectable to radar than its American inspiration. Available evidence suggests that the H-20 might be able to adjust its wing angle. However, the seam required to do this makes the plane more detectable. If the wings are angled at any point, the plane will be much less stealthy than if it had a smooth design like the B-2. This reality leaves one wondering why Chinese engineers decided to build such a feature if stealth was the intention. With both the J-20 and H-20, China has shown that it may have been able to lift data on stealth aircraft, but it has a less than perfect understanding of why America designed those planes the way it did. Data can be stolen, but institutional experience is a lot harder to replicate. China also has been keenly interested in stealing naval secrets. Building a strong navy enough to challenge America's maritime dominance is vital for it if it wants to break the containment of the First Island Chain, which is the chain of islands encompassing Japan, Taiwan, portions of the Philippines, and Indonesia, and become a military superpower. Countering them and getting equally advanced submarines is therefore a high priority for Beijing. China has only a few nuclear submarines, and even the ones it does have are noisy. The existing submarines are noisier than Soviet-era nuclear submarines from the 1970s, which make it almost impossible for them to bypass the First Island Chain's choke points without being detected. The PLAN has two new submarine types in development to make up for this shortcoming. These are the Type 095 nuclear attack and the Type 096 nuclear ballistic missile submarines, respectively. Both of these submarines should be significantly quieter thanks to the presence of a single hull, a shaftless drive, and electronic noise-cancelling technology. The new submarines will also be larger than their predecessors, which will help keep the noise lower because the diameter of the previous ones was too small to provide enough space to insulate the steel exterior from the interior vibrations of the vessel's machinery. The exteriors will also have anechoic coating to make them less detectable. China has also used Russian technology to make its submarines quieter, as seen in the latter's Akula-class submarines. The influence in stolen American designs might be particularly seen in the coming JL-3 submarine-launched ballistic missile, which is expected to have a range of about 9,000 to 10,000 kilometers. Each of these missiles might carry multiple warheads delivered through multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. This feature might have been inspired by the US Navy's Trident II, which can carry up to 14 warheads with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, or MIRVs. However, the Center for Strategic and International Studies still believes the JL-3 will be less payload-heavy, with up to about 3 warheads per missile. It's also notable that the Trident II still likely has a longer range than the JL-3 at 12,000 kilometers. Despite some remaining shortcomings, experts expect that China's new submarines will be operational by 2030 and pose a much more formidable threat than the current submarine force. This is partly why the United States and United Kingdom decided to share nuclear submarine technology with Australia in the AUKUS Agreement of 2021. China's military still has rough edges. The recent scandal revealed that corruption remains a persistent problem. Nevertheless, it's no longer the military backwater it was 30 years ago, at the time of the third Taiwan Strait crisis. Beijing has built a military machine much more capable of offensive power projection, and one whose weaponry and technology is still improving. Gone are the days when China fielded outdated second-generation fighter jets and had limited naval capability. The improvements in China's military technology have at least as much to do with its state-sponsored espionage campaign as it does with its domestic defense industry. China is much more careful about its cybernetic efforts today, and the cybersecurity of America's governments and defense contractors are much more sophisticated. The brazenness of Operation Shady Rat is now a thing of the past. However, its impact will be felt for many years to come. China's rise as a military power is in large part thanks to the extensive set of secrets that APT-1 was able to lift from America's premier defense contractors through the use of innocent-looking phishing emails. Although its ability to completely replicate and replace American military technology seems less clear, China's hackers have demonstrated their ability to rob, and sometimes that's all you need to make yourself powerful enough to undermine the international status quo and the efforts of the ruling power to maintain it. PLA Unit 61398 is still active. What do you think of China's Operation Shady Rat? What other military secrets might it have stolen? And how will Unit 61398 operate in the future? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more military analysis from military experts. Now go check out the real reason why China's world domination plan failed, or click this other video instead. Guess who's back in the military spotlight? Japan's shaking off its peaceful image and stepping into some serious boots, aiming to become a major player in the defense game again. With neighbors casting nervous glances and an assertive China on the rise, Japan's move is stirring up the waters in East Asia. Today, we're diving into what's behind Japan's big pivot from pacifism, checking out their shiny new military toys, and seeing how old rivals are reacting to this plot twist. It's a story of transformation, tension, and alliances in the making. Join us as we uncover how Japan is rewriting its role on the regional stage, challenging the status quo, and maybe, just maybe, changing the game for good. But first, let's delve into the intriguing history of Japan's rise to power, setting the stage to peel back the layers of today's geopolitical shifts pushing Tokyo out of its strategic shell. What's driving this dramatic change, and why now? To understand, let's turn our attention to Japan's most formidable neighboring giant, China. The rise of China since it opened up following Mao's death, and particularly since it joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, has severely disrupted the international balance of power in East Asia. Between 2002 and 2022, China's economy grew by an average of 8.8% per year. In contrast, Japan grew only at an average rate of 0.65%, entering sharp recessions between 2008 and 2009, and again between 2019 and 2020. In 2010, China surpassed Japan as the largest economy in Asia and the second largest in the world. The new economic order inevitably meant a new military one. In 2002, Japan was ahead of China in military spending, with the former spending about $40 billion, the second most in the world, to China's $30 billion. That changed fast. China became the world's second largest military spender in 2007, a spot it's not relinquished since. In 2022, China spent almost $300 billion on its military, which was 5.5 times Japan's expenditure at about $54 billion. The true number is likely higher than that, as the United States Department of Defense noted that China's real military budget is likely between 1.1 and 2 times higher than its official figures suggest. This would increase the gap between China and Japan to 11.2 times at maximum interpretation. China has used its new military might to build the world's largest navy by sheer number of vessels, modernize its air force, increase its nuclear stockpile, and build an arsenal of thousands of ballistic and cruise missiles. All of these assets severely threaten Japan's national security, and China has demonstrated a willingness to use them. In nearby seas and skies, China has cranked up its gray zone operations against the Senkaku Islands and Taiwan. In 2016, a Chinese naval vessel entered the 12 nautical mile territorial sea around the Senkaku Islands for the first time. Previously, only Chinese Coast Guard ships had done so. In 2018, a Chinese submarine did the same. In 2020, Chinese Coast Guard ships operated near the Senkaku Islands for 111 consecutive days, and 333 for all of 2020. In February 2021, Beijing enacted a new law authorizing the Chinese Coast Guard to use force against foreign vessels in maritime areas under Chinese jurisdiction. Conveniently, this includes the Senkakus, which China claims are its Diaoyu Islands. In 2022 and 23, China conducted a series of large naval and air exercises off Taiwan. As part of these operations, some missiles entered Japan's airspace and waters. Further afield, China's military expansion in the South China Sea threatens to cut the shipping lanes that Japan depends on. In 2022, Japan imported 25.3% of its GDP and exported 21.5%. 42% of this maritime trade passes through the South China Sea. Among the most important of these resources is oil going through the Strait of Malacca from the Persian Gulf. Though less pronounced than China's, the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear ballistic missile program, the latter of which frequently violates Japanese airspace, also poses a significant challenge for Tokyo. Japan also shares a maritime border with Russia, which became more aggressive against its neighbors under Vladimir Putin, ultimately leading to a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Tokyo and Moscow also dispute control over the southernmost Kuril Islands. Some policymakers in Japan have described their country as being on the front lines in the face of these aggressive authoritarian nations. In response to these developments, the Japanese government under Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced in November 2022 that it would increase defense spending to reach 2% of GDP by April 2027. While the reaction to this development was positive in the United States and among its Western allies, the response in the region was much more surprising. Some of the nations Japan has traditionally been at odds with, like South Korea, welcomed the move, if tepidly. Why is this development so surprising, and what implications could it have for Japan's influence in the region? To grasp the full impact, we need to delve into Japan's historically tense relationships with its neighbors. For most of its history, Japan was an isolationist country. Being an island nation, it could afford to be. Japanese warriors fought each other far more frequently than they fought foreign enemies. Prior to World War II, only one foreign power ever attempted to attack the Japanese home islands. This was the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan in 1274 and 1281. Both of these attempts were short-lived failures, and Japan kept to its own devices for 3 more centuries. Still, Japan displayed an early willingness to learn from foreigners that would prove critical for its national trajectory later on. We'll get to that soon. When Portuguese traders brought firearms to Japan, the country's warriors quickly adapted to them. This was the country's Sengoku period, the span between the mid-15th and early 17th centuries that saw the decline of Japan's previous central government under the Ashikaga shogunate and the rise of ambitious and powerful feudal lords known as daimyo, who saw their chance to increase their wealth, power, and influence. In this era, Japan was one of the most militarized and dangerous places in the world, with more frequent and intense fighting than any other country. Hundreds of thousands of people likely died. Even so, Japan's militarism was contained strictly within its island borders. That changed radically in the 1590s. By then, the country had been brought to a period of relative peace thanks to the efforts of two of Japan's so-called three unifiers, Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi. However, Japan was still a heavily militarized society, and the peace at home was precarious, especially with Hideyoshi's lowly origins and lack of an heir of military age. In 1592, Japan abandoned its isolationism and invaded Korea. Hideyoshi apparently expected an easy campaign that would help consolidate his control over Japan, not least of which by removing many dangerous samurai that could rebel against him. On land, he was correct, as better armed and battle-hardened Japanese soldiers easily defeated their Korean foes. Although historians debate the grandness of Hideyoshi's ambitions, he made overtures of conquering Ming China, demanding tribute from the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines and even moving onward to India. We will never know how serious he was about these ideas, but they did anticipate things to come, and it was the beginning of a long-running historical animosity between Korea and Japan. Hideyoshi's successor as the ruler of Japan was Tokugawa Ieyasu, who returned the country to its traditional isolationism. For 250 years, Japan remained at peace and cut itself off from the rest of the world. The only foreigners allowed to enter the country were Dutch traders at the port of Dejima near Nagasaki. It brought short-term benefits, but this policy nearly proved disastrous at a time when the power of the European empires was growing. In 1839, the First Opium War began in China. This marked the start of what the Chinese government considers today their country's century of humiliation. China was defeated, and subsequent defeats forced the Qing dynasty into unequal treaties with the Western powers. Japan proved much more adaptable. Although isolated, Japanese officials and scholars were interested in the Western knowledge the Dutch traders brought with them, and they remained informed of events abroad. When the American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan in 1853, the Japanese understood that they were at a hopeless disadvantage. Wanting to avoid the fate of China at all costs, forward-thinking leaders in Japan agreed to trade treaties with the West on far more equal terms than those imposed on China. They also ended the Tokugawa shogunate and built a modern industrial state under the authority of the Emperor Meiji in a period known as the Meiji Restoration. Japan successfully modernized and therefore avoided being colonized or dictated to by the Western powers. Indeed, the country's rise to international power in the late 19th century was phenomenal. To prove the point, it defeated the Qing dynasty in the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894–95 and annexed the island of Formosa, modern Taiwan, to its authority. It also forced Qing China to recognize the Korean peninsula as being in Japan's sphere of influence. After its victory over Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904–1905, the Western powers tacitly acknowledged Japan as the hegemon of Northeast Asia and did not interfere in the sphere of influence it had created for itself. Japan had once again ended its isolationism and achieved a level of power only supposedly imagined in Hideyoshi's wildest dreams. With this success behind it, Japan was in a position to launch its bid for domination of the wider Indo-Pacific region. Under the umbrella of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, Japan hoped to solidify its hegemony over all of East Asia, pushing out both Western imperialism and communism. However, Japan's defeat in World War II ended these ambitions. The country's post-war constitution explicitly renounced war or even the threat of war as a legitimate function of the new Japanese state. Constitutionally, Japan may only maintain a military force adequate to its self-defense. For the rest of its geopolitical security, it would rely on its new ally, the United States, whose military was stationed in the country partially as a way of preventing Japan's strategic resurgence. For decades, this arrangement kept East Asia in a state of relative peace, but even so, Japan's neighbors never forgot the country's aggressive foreign policy, both under its previous Meiji regime between 1889 and 1947, and in some cases, the much more remote Sengoku period. Japan still remained a significant regional player. It was until 2010 the largest economy in Asia and had a huge soft power presence through the power of its popular entertainment industry. Despite this, anti-Japanese sentiment remains strong, which was one of the reasons why Tokyo resisted rearmament for such a long time. Even with the hawkish policies of Shinzo Abe, who was in power for a record 9 years between two terms, Japan proved institutionally reluctant to a major shift in its post-World War II defense posture. Although Abe increased military spending, he did not do so in a way that radically departed from his predecessors. Abe had more success in loosening the strict interpretation of Japan's Article 9. In 2015, the PM pushed legislation through the country's parliament that recognized Japan's right to be involved in collective self-defense with its allies, meaning that it could deploy its military overseas to assist its allies in the event of hostilities. Although this move was welcomed by the United States, it set off deep doubts among other countries in Asia, especially in the Northeast. Nevertheless, it's arguable that Abe was making a smart bet with his plans to expand Japan's military power. The shift in the region's geopolitical balance and the way Japan remade itself in the decades after World War II also meant a gradual shift in public sentiment toward the prospect of a more capable Japanese military in the region. For example, in the late 1970s, Japan began its Fukuda doctrine of reaching out to the Southeast Asian nations by reiterating its pacifism and emphasizing a more equal relationship. This helped to improve relations with those countries until Japan was viewed positively. In 2015, both China and Japan were viewed favorably by a majority of the public in the region, according to a Pew Scientific survey of over 15,300 people. Over 80% of the public in Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines viewed Japan favorably, while 71% of Indonesians did. Such views of Japan in the areas it formerly occupied reflects the effectiveness of the Fukuda doctrine and Tokyo's soft power strategy. Still further north, in the area with the deepest historical experience with Japan, views were far different. Only 25% of South Koreans and 12% of Chinese viewed Japan favorably. That same year, another Pew study revealed that 61% of South Koreans viewed China favorably, 78% of Malaysians, 63% of Indonesians, and even 54% of Filipinos did. But the Vietnamese had a sharply negative 74% disapproval rating of China, and 89% of the Japanese public did. By 2023, when the results of China's more aggressive foreign policy had become more apparent, the situation changed sharply. In that year's Pew survey, 77% of South Koreans viewed China unfavorably. Approval in Indonesia also dropped dramatically, with a 49% favorable and 25% unfavorable rating. Japan, meanwhile, largely maintained its favorable ratings. A 2023 poll of ASEAN countries by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs revealed that 93% of those surveys had a favorable view of Japan. 91% valued the country's role as an upholder of peace and stability in the region, and 88% said Japan was a peace-loving nation in the decades since the end of World War II. Doubts remained. Taiwan and South Korea, the two countries with the deepest historical experience of being occupied by Japan, were the most hostile. Even in 2020, President Tsai Ing-wen saw criticism for tweeting in Japanese during her re-election campaign. However, for a Taiwan constantly under threat from a mainland Chinese regime that has repeatedly said that reunification is not optional, there has been little choice but to embrace Japan. A 2022 survey by the Japan-Taiwan Exchange Association's Taipei office, essentially the Japanese embassy in Taiwan, revealed that 60% of respondents said Japan was the country they could trust the most, which was up by 10 points from the previous study done in 2018. 60% also chose Japan as their favorite foreign country. The shift in attitude is more pronounced among younger cohorts. Of Japan's neighbors, relations with South Korea are the most complicated. They grew worse even as China's intentions to unilaterally overthrow the status quo in the region became clear. In 2019, Japan announced it would no longer consider South Korea a favored trading partner and imposed export controls on electronic components that are vital for major South Korean companies like Samsung. The move came after diplomatic and court battles involving Japan's atrocities in Korea during the colonization period between 1910 and 1945. South Koreans responded to Japan's move with a widespread boycott. However, relations between the two began to mend with the election of Yoon Suk-yeol to the South Korean presidency in 2022. In the summer of 2023, Yoon and Kishida met with Biden at Camp David. There, they released a statement committing to a new era of cooperation, including annual meetings at the summit and ministerial levels on security and economic matters. The shift marked an end to South Korea's previous policy of trying to deepen economic ties with China while maintaining its security alignment with the United States. With such wins behind it, Tokyo could begin its new military buildup on firmer footing in the region. When the Kishida government announced its intentions for Japan's military, reaction in the region was not as hostile as it would have been a few years earlier. For example, in Thailand, a country not occupied during the war but forced into alliance with it, state media reacted in a mixed manner. It warned Japan to be extremely careful, as if this trend continues unabated, it could backfire and rekindle old flames. Nevertheless, the ties praised Japan for strengthening its maritime security operation with Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. In South Korea, public reaction was more negative, with some media sources fearing that Japan's new offensive capabilities would lead to unwelcome military involvement on the Korean peninsula. Nevertheless, South Korea's foreign ministry was much more receptive to the announcement than it would have been a year earlier, while warning that Tokyo must get its consent before taking any action that would gravely affect Seoul's national interests, such as using its new counter-strike capability around the Korean peninsula. The South Koreans nevertheless said that it was desirable for Japan to implement a security policy that would contribute to regional stability. In August 2023, the United States, South Korea, and Japan showcased their united front with joint ballistic missile defense drills in the East China Sea, a direct response to North Korea's botched satellite launch. Fast forward 2 months, and the trio unveiled their inaugural trilateral aerial drill. But Japan's strategic alliances stretch beyond this triad, its fortifying relationships across the region. As a pivotal player in the Quad alongside the United States, Australia, and India, Japan actively engages in exercises like Malabar, reinforcing its military footprint. A testament to this expanding reach is the deployment of Japanese F-35 jets to Australia, marking a new chapter of defense cooperation. Japan's web of security partnerships isn't just growing, it's evolving, knitting a stronger fabric of regional defense with Southeast Asia as its latest thread. But how is it doing this, and what does this mean for the future of Asia-Pacific security? In 2016, despite the overtures then-President Rodrigo Duterte made to China, Japan, and the Philippines, signed an agreement allowing the transfer of defense equipment. In 2023, this bore fruit, with the Philippines purchasing a Mitsubishi electronic warning and radar control system. In April 2022, Japan and the Philippines agreed to expand their partnership and conduct more joint military drills. In November 2023, Japan and Vietnam agreed to deepen their bilateral security cooperation, including the potential for the former to transfer military equipment to the latter. The next month, Japan and Malaysia announced they would elevate their relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. This announcement included the signing of a new security deal worth $2.8 million to help Malaysia's maritime security. Equipment provisions included supplies and rescue boats, and according to Malaysian sources, monitoring and surveillance equipment. Many of these new partnerships are part of Japan's Overseas Security Assistance Program, which is part of its new regional security strategy. This is an understated break from its post-World War II foreign policy, which forbade Tokyo from using international aid for military purposes. Other partner countries in the OSA include Fiji and Bangladesh. While this program forbids the transfer of lethal equipment, there's no guarantee that prohibition will remain in place in the future, should policymakers in Tokyo consider the transfer of lethal aid to be warranted. Perhaps the best way to sum up the situation comes from the same Thai state media source we mentioned earlier. It must be clear today that the Japan with which Southeast Asia has been familiar throughout the post-war years is no longer the same. The past 70 years of a docile Japan are no more. The news that Japan would be ending its strategic retreat would in prior years be met with great alarm in East Asia. However, the times are changing fast. Because of the success of its economic partnerships and the flowering of its soft power, Japan was able to improve or mend relations with nations it once abused, and the rise of a newly aggressive China has left these less powerful nations with little choice but to align with Japan. While the new weapons it's arming itself with might get the most attention, the broader military context is that Japan is gradually ending its hard power isolation. With its new military hardware at home and security partnerships abroad, including with partners that might have been unthinkable a few years ago, Japan is poised to be a regional military powerhouse, and this time with a much more positive reception among its neighbors. What do you think about Japan's military buildup and the security partnerships it's made with its neighbors? Is Japan about to reclaim its place as the leading military power in East Asia? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Now go and check out how the Ukrainian conflict is reshaping Japan's defense strategy, or click this other video instead. Also, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more military analysis from military experts. Since Russia stepped into Ukraine in 2014, escalating to a full-blown invasion in 2022, Poland's military strategy hit turbo mode. Joining NATO back in 1999, it wasn't clear Poland was gunning to be a major military force in Europe. But times have changed. Poland is on a mission, boosting its defense spending to an unprecedented 4% of its GDP by 2024. That's a bigger slice of the budget pie than any of its NATO allies are dishing out, dedicating more than half to acquiring the latest gear. But this isn't just about numbers, it's a clear signal. Poland is determined not to stay in the shadows of its powerful neighbors. With eyes on becoming the leading military force in Europe, Poland is upping its game, investing heavily in modernizing its arsenal. But ambition and reality don't always align smoothly. As Poland gears up, let's dive into the transformation of its forces, the goal to become Europe's top dog in defense, and challenges this ambitious leap forward entails. Poland isn't just another piece on NATO's chessboard, it's a key player. But what makes it stand out? As Europe's sixth largest economy and the heavyweight on NATO's eastern flank, Poland's role is more than just national defense. It's about being a steadfast guardian for its smaller allies, like the Baltic states. The nation's military strength is not merely for show, it's a critical component of NATO's collective security, offering crucial support to those on the front lines of potential conflicts. Geography shapes destiny, especially in military terms, and Poland's prime location serves as a crucial chess piece in NATO's strategic playbook. Here's why. Poland sits on the southern side of the Suwalki Gap, the roughly 100-kilometer border between it and Lithuania that straddles the trajectory between the heavily fortified Russian enclave of Kaliningrad in the west and Moscow's vassal state of Belarus in the east. A strong Polish military is therefore crucial to the security of the Baltic states, as a pincer movement between Kaliningrad and Belarus could cut them off from their NATO allies by land. Although Sweden's official entry into the alliance in March 2024 has since relieved some of the security pressures by opening an alternative route of supply and reinforcement through the Baltic Sea. Even without such a pincer movement, Poland faces threats from both the north and east in Kaliningrad and Belarus, both of which host some of Russia's nuclear weapons on their respective soils. The Poles do not have the luxury of being buffered as the Western European countries in NATO do. Warsaw must have a strong military to provide deterrence and, if need be, self-defense. The Polish military in some ways resembles Ukraine's, with a mixture of Western and Soviet-era equipment, although because of its long-time NATO membership, Poland is in a stronger starting position to complete its modernization and integrate the new equipment with modern doctrine. As of January 2024, the Polish military is ranked 21st out of 145 countries listed in the Global Firepower Index. Its current military is composed of 202,100 active personnel and 350,000 in reserve. Poland plans to increase the size of its active duty army to 300,000 by 2035, which would make it the largest army in Europe. The new troops will enable Poland to create 6 armored divisions. In comparison, France and Germany only have 2 of these, while the United Kingdom has just 1. There is an additional 50,000 paramilitary troops for Warsaw to call upon. In the event of a wider confrontation which calls for conscription, Poland has a total population of about 40 million, with 18.6 million in available manpower reserves. Of these, 15.2 million are considered fit for military service. About 455,000 people reach military age on an annual basis. According to the Global Firepower Index, Poland has 612 tanks in its fleet, with 459 of these being ready for service. Poland is gradually discarding the Soviet-era tanks in its stockpile, which have proven less than optimal for modern warfare. Instead, it's donating these tanks to Ukraine and using the funds for its military buildup to buy 366 Abrams tanks from the United States. 250 of these will be the newest variety, the M1A2 SEP version 3. The remainder will be of the older but still capable M1A1 FEP variety. In addition to the American Abrams, Poland is also ordering 1,000 K2 Black Panther main battle tanks from South Korea. An initial batch of these tanks have been delivered to Poland as of 2022, and the rest of them will have been delivered by 2025. Poland has obtained a license from the South Koreans to produce 820 of the tanks from domestic manufacturers. The license will be valid for 10 years and be a welcome way for Warsaw to increase its homegrown defense manufacturing capability. Indeed, voices within the country are warning that the domestic defense industry should not be allowed to atrophy because of all the purchases of foreign military equipment. The South Korean license helps to ensure that outcome will be avoided. Poland has 13,956 other military vehicles in service, with 10,467 of these being ready for a deployment. Poland plans to add 1,000 of its domestically produced Borsuk infantry fighting vehicles to its fleet, alongside an additional 400 auxiliary versions, i.e. specialist vehicles based on the Borsuk chassis design. Warsaw's order of these units is meant to replace the Cold War-era BWP-1, a domestic redesign of the Soviet BMP-1. The Borsuk has a remote-controlled turret armed with a 30mm cannon and 2 launchers for Spike LR anti-tank guided missiles. As a secondary armament, the Borsuk comes with a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun. The vehicle is capable of amphibious operations and propelled by 2 water jets in such conditions. It can cross lakes and rivers while remaining afloat. The price tag is about $6.6 million per unit. Here's something you may not have known before. Poland is already ranked 15th in artillery on the Global Firepower Index. Although it's lacking in towed artillery with 0 pieces, it has 525 units of self-propelled artillery, such as its domestically produced 155mm Crab howitzer. 394 of its self-propelled artillery pieces are considered to be ready. It plans to add 648 South Korean K9A1 self-propelled howitzers to this force. The new units would place Poland at number 10 on the GFI's listing of global artillery power. In terms of rocket artillery systems, Poland has 211 MLRS units, with 158 of them being fit for duty. Warsaw is planning to supplement this force with 500 American HIMARS systems and 288 South Korean Chunmoo MLRS systems. Such a force will bring Poland's ranking in the related index from 25th to 5th, even surpassing the United States at its current ranking of 7th with 694. It's unclear if Poland plans to add any towed artillery units into its military. While Poland is traditionally a land power by geographic necessity, it's not neglecting its naval forces as part of its arms buildup. Poland can afford to rely more on its allies in the Baltic, something which Sweden's entry into NATO, in particular, enhances greatly, but it does not want to take any chances. Poland's navy is small, with 45 total assets. Most of these consist of its 21 mine warfare ships. It has 2 frigates, as many corvettes, 3 patrol vessels, and 1 submarine. Poland plans to add to this force. 3 new Michnik-class frigates are on order in a $3.8 billion deal struck between the Polish military and the British defense contractor Babcock. The 3 new frigates will be based on the Royal Navy's Type 31 design. The British expect the Type 31 to enter service by 2031. These frigates will carry a crew of 105 sailors and displace about 6,000 tons. The Type 31's main armament will consist of 32 cells for various types of missiles. To back the missiles up, these frigates will also be armed with a 57mm gun and 2 40mm guns. 12.7mm machine guns serve as ancillary weapons. Poland isn't aiming to build a blue water navy like the United States or even the United Kingdom and France, but that's because it recognizes its needs, which are to provide security in the Baltic. Poland's new frigate will serve in their purpose of being part of NATO's local naval capabilities. The new ships will also be prepared as part of a NATO force to counter the new ships Russia is commissioning into its navy, which also tend to be lighter frigates and corvettes, as its heavier Soviet-era destroyers and cruisers gradually get retired. Moscow cannot afford to build adequate replacements, as seen with the troubled Leida-class destroyer project. To support its army and navy buildup, Poland is also looking to the skies. It ranks 26th in the world's air fleets, with a total of 468 aircraft. 351 of these are considered fit for service. 59 of these aircraft are fighters, and 44 of them are ready for deployment. Many of Poland's fighter aircraft are Soviet-era 4th-generation fighters like the MiG-29. Warsaw has steadily donated these aircraft to Ukraine and is building an air force of modern fighter jets. It already has 48 upgraded F-16C fighters in its arsenal. It plans to have at least 32 F-35 Lightning II aircraft as part of its vision for the new Polish Air Force. The F-35 fleet in particular will make Poland the sentinel of NATO's eastern frontier and give it an advantage over any Russian air attack. The F-35 purchases will mean that Poland has more 5th-generation fighters than even Russia, which has only acquired 22 Su-57 Felon aircraft as of December 2023. Russia plans to get to a fleet size of 76 of these aircraft in the coming years, but because of sanctions, this will be a difficult challenge. The F-35 is also far stealthier than the Su-57, giving the Polish fleet an advantage in modern long-range air battles. Poland plans to acquire an additional 48 Fa-50 Golden Eagle light aircraft from South Korea. The Fa-50 can serve as a supersonic trainer to transition Polish pilots to the F-35, but that's not all this aircraft can do. The Fa-50 Block 10 and Block 20 fighters that Poland has ordered have improved systems, such as the ANAAQ-33 Sniper targeting pod, manufactured by Lockheed Martin. This device permits far more offensive capabilities for the Golden Eagle, such as the ability to deploy laser-guided munitions and beyond-visual range air-to-air missiles, such as the AIM-120 AMRAAM, the Meteor, and potentially the AIM-260 JATM. At shorter ranges, the FA-50 can use the AIM-9 Sidewinder series in the air and various types of air-to-surface missiles for ground attack missions. For even longer-ranged ground attack missions, the South Korean military has begun reviewing whether it will be possible to arm the Golden Eagle with a variant of Germany's Taurus air-launched cruise missile. If it's possible, the Poles would likely show great interest. These missiles have a range of about 500 kilometers and give the Poles the ability to threaten Kaliningrad and Russian bases in Belarus from afar. In addition to fighter aircraft, Poland has 34 attack aircraft, with 26 of these being considered ready by the Global Firepower Index. Poland has 49 transport aircraft, with 37 fit for service. It has 107 trainers, with 80 of them being considered fit, although this number will go up thanks to the arrival of the FA-50. Poland has no aircraft refueling tankers, which limits the range of its air force, although these are not needed for Poland's defense-centric mission. In the worst case, Warsaw might think that it can rely on its American ally to provide these services. There are 9 special mission aircraft in the Polish Air Force, with 7 being fit for service. Finally, the Poles have a fleet of 215 helicopters, which ranks them 21st in the world. 161 of these helicopters are ready for service. 30 of the helicopters are attack varieties, which ranks Poland 20th in the world. 23 of these aircraft are considered fit for service. That number is about to shoot up in a major way. In September 2022, Poland ordered 96 AH-64E Apache helicopters from the United States in a contract worth $12 billion. This is enough for Warsaw to create 6 helicopter squadrons. Poland will also be boosting its air defense systems, something which the war in Ukraine has proven to be an urgent necessity, since the country's existing systems are mostly composed of outdated Cold War-era equipment. Warsaw plans to purchase $5 billion worth of Patriot air defense missiles from the United States, with 2 batteries of 16 launchers in the first phase. In the second phase, Poland will receive 6 additional batteries with improved radar offering 360-degree coverage. To further strengthen its air defenses, the Poles have made an initial order for $2.4 billion worth of British CAM missiles. Poland's 3 new frigates will also be capable of launching these missiles. Poland is also looking to improve its shorter-range air defenses. As part of this project called Naru, the Polish military will receive 23 short-range air defense batteries, comprising a total of almost 400 launchers, with missiles that can hit targets between 25 and 50 kilometers away. The Ukrainians have shown in recent months that these systems can also be used in an offensive capacity. Deploying them strategically near the front has allowed Ukraine to shoot down 11 Russian aircraft in 11 days in February 2024. If Russia was hesitant to use its aircraft against the Ukrainians, Poland's new air defense systems will be that much more of a deterrent for Moscow's plans. Because of Poland's economic growth, it's in a much better position to afford a modern military than the rest of its NATO allies in Eastern Europe. However, that does not mean that the new armament program will be easy for Warsaw to handle, and there is no guarantee of success in the way the Polish government envisions. For example, just because Poland desires to spend a lot of money on acquiring new equipment does not mean it will easily be able to integrate it into its armed forces. Training and adjustment will come with their own challenges. The money is also not guaranteed. Paying for the new firepower will be challenging despite Poland's newfound wealth, even with a $2 billion loan from the United States. $60 million of this American loan is provided as foreign military financing, which supports urgent procurement of defense articles and services from the United States. This $60 million will help to ensure that Poland can get more favorable terms for the total loan, but we will need to see if it can actually do so. Poland also recently experienced a change in government, with the previous ruling Law and Justice Party losing a few dozen seats in the country's parliament and Donald Tusk emerging as the new prime minister as part of a coalition. The military buildup was a central policy of the previous government. The previous deputy prime minister, the influential Jarosław Kaczyński, had planned on spending as much as 5% of the country's GDP on defense within the next decade. Although the invasion of Ukraine has made the necessity for a strong defense clear, especially for the historically aware Poles, it remains to be seen if the new government will carry through the build-up to the extent that the Law and Justice Party had planned. Perhaps the bigger challenge that comes with the military build-up for Poland is what Warsaw will have to give up in exchange for the increase in the capability of its armed forces. The new military spending, Zolder warns, by necessity assumes an increase in GDP. While Poland has averaged a growth rate of nearly 4% since the end of the Cold War in 1991, that's not guaranteed to remain the case over the time span that Warsaw envisions for its arms buildup, especially since GDP growth tends to decline once a country is more developed. In 2024, the International Monetary Fund estimated that Poland's GDP would grow at a rate of 2.5%, significantly down from earlier projections of 3.1%. Zolder's report also warns that Poland's level of military spending would see other priorities go unmet, with weaknesses in the healthcare and education sectors in particular. Inflation is also a problem. In January 2023, Poland had reached an inflation rate of a staggering 17.2%. Such high price increases add to political instability and questions the feasibility of such a large increase in military spending at the expense of civilian sectors of the economy. In his report, Zolder also raises doubts about the viability of the second source of funding for the military buildup, which is Poland's Armed Forces Support Fund. This entity is supposed to issue bonds to raise the money needed to make the equipment purchases and recruit the new troops. While there do not seem to have been problems with raising the money so far, one cannot guarantee that investors will be eager to buy such bonds forever. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of Poland's military buildup is in the recruitment of the personnel needed to fill the ranks and operate the new systems. Poland's population is shrinking. Demographers with the World Population Review expect Poland's current population of about 40 million to shrink to about 38 million people by 2035, the date Poland aims to complete the recruitment of its new 300,000-man active army. However, recruiting these new soldiers could be a challenge, and there will be a steadily shorter supply of available manpower in the coming years. The country's changing demographics will also require a proportional greater share of the national wealth to be spent on elder care, leaving less money available to support the military. Poland's rush to expand its military power in response to recent geopolitical developments is understandable. Its history with Russia is long and painful, and it's the most significant NATO country on the alliance's eastern flank. Its rapid military buildup would see it re-emerge as Europe's sentinel opposed to an expanding Russian presence, a task it was forced to carry out as late as 1920, when it stopped the expansion of Soviet Bolshevism into Eastern Europe with its crushing victory at the Battle of Warsaw that summer. Poland intends to make sure that it can do such a thing again. There is no doubt that the Polish military will be much more capable than it was by the end of the 2020s compared to when the decade began. Significant obstacles remain in the way of Poland acquiring as much military power as it wants to, however. What do you think of these obstacles? Will Poland be able to become the most powerful military on the European continent within the next decade, as it intends? Don't forget to let us know in the comments. Also, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to support the channel and for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out how Poland is preparing for full-scale war against Russia, or click this other video instead. Today, the United States is the largest superpower in the world. But has that always been the case? The answer to that question is a resounding no. In fact, up until the Second World War, the United States had no interest in becoming a major power. If that's true, how did America become a superpower? And why did it happen after World War II? We hear the word superpower all of the time, but what does that really mean? You'd be surprised to learn that there's no real definition of what makes a country a superpower, at least one that everyone can agree on. Also, there are no specific numbers a country needs to achieve to be considered a superpower, be it the size of the army, the country's GDP, or the number of allies it has. So if there's no definition of superpower, or specific numbers that a country needs to achieve, then how do you know if you are a superpower? It mostly comes down to what other countries think. If they believe you are a superpower, then you probably are a superpower. But that is not enough to define superpower. We must look deeper into what makes a superpower. Perhaps there are certain traits that all superpowers share. In fact, there are. Military might. Superpowers need to have a large and powerful military. They must be able to project force almost everywhere in the world, on the ground, in the air, and at sea. Their weapons are technologically superior to other countries and almost always have military bases spread across the globe. Economic strength. A superpower must have a strong economy. This can be best measured through its gross domestic product. What is GDP? It's a way to measure the total value of all goods and services produced within a country. A high GDP typically indicates a strong economy. There are other factors as well: a moderate inflation rate, low unemployment, an extensive infrastructure, a reasonable amount of foreign debt. International influence. A superpower can convince other countries to support its interests, policies, and actions. Often this takes the form of countries sharing mutual interests and building strong alliances. In extreme situations, a superpower has the willingness to impose economic sanctions and sometimes will threaten military action to get its way. Although these three factors, military might, a strong economy, and being able to influence other countries, are the hallmarks of a superpower, there are other factors as well. Superpowers are politically stable. It doesn't matter if they are democratic or authoritarian, just that the government is stable. Superpowers tend to have large populations and plentiful resources. They possess advanced technology, and their people have a strong sense of nationalism. They have a unified culture, and there is little or no sectionalism. So now we know the traits of a superpower. Let's look at some of the countries that may have been considered superpowers in the modern era. Britain may have been considered a superpower at one time. At the dawn of the 20th century, Britain possessed almost all of the traits of a superpower. It had a large military and the most powerful navy in the world, and with that navy it could project power almost anywhere. It had a vast network of colonies, so vast that it was once said that the sun never set on the British Empire. It was highly influential in world affairs and had a strong economy based on manufacturing and trade. Although Britain itself did not possess vast resources, it was able to rely on its colonies to produce everything it needed. Its internal population was not particularly large, but when combined with its colonies, it had a significant population as well. It had all the earmarks of a superpower. But what about the United States? What's the background story here? The answer may surprise you. Throughout most of its history, the United States was considered a minor, relatively insignificant country. It was far from Europe, had a very small army, and had little interest in becoming a major power. Aside from the Western Hemisphere, the United States largely ignored the rest of the world. That began to change in 1898 as a result of the Spanish-American War. Almost everyone expected Spain would win, and win easily. After all, it was militarily much larger. Yet the Americans swiftly defeated the Spanish at sea and on land. Not only did the United States soundly defeat a major European power, it had done so in a mere 6 weeks. What was even more impressive was that the United States had been able to capture Spanish territory far from its shores. By the end of the war, America controlled several territories in the Caribbean. It had also wrestled control of the Philippines Islands far from America's shores. With the Philippines, America now had a foothold in Asia, a base from which it could trade throughout the region. It also annexed the Hawaiian Islands, allowing it to control part of the Central Pacific Ocean. To everyone's surprise, the United States had built a small empire for itself. Europe began to realize that the United States had the potential to become a world power. Its vast resources and manufacturing capabilities had long been known, but in its war with Spain, the United States had shown an unexpected military capability. Not only could it raise an army very quickly, from less than 30,000 soldiers to 220,000 in a matter of months, it could fight far beyond its territorial waters. It was the perfect opportunity for the United States to establish itself as a rising power. Yet, within a few years, the United States lost interest in the rest of the world and retreated into isolationism. It slashed the size of its military and refused to involve itself in European politics. It remained that way until 1917, when it entered the First World War. Much like the Spanish-American War, the United States entered the First World War with a small military. In fact, the army was smaller than 13 of the states that were already active in the war. It had a standing army of less than 130,000 soldiers in 1917. A year later, it had 4 million men under arms, half of them serving in Europe. And again, the United States showed that it could project force far from home. At its peak, some 10,000 soldiers arrived in France each day. For a time, however, it appeared that America wanted to become part of a wider world. It even proposed the creation of an international body to resolve disputes through dialogue, diplomacy, and mediation. It was the first institution of its kind in the modern era. Instead of returning to isolation, the United States sought to bring the nations of the world together and participate in the global community beyond trade and military actions. It was called the League of Nations. More than 40 nations signed on to the League of Nations immediately. These included major powers such as the United Kingdom and France. Lesser powers such as Japan and the newly formed Soviet Union were also founding members. They were joined by many other countries around the world, including Brazil, China, South Africa, and others. At its peak, the League of Nations had more than 60 members, with representatives from every region of the world. Yet, the country that proposed the idea of the League of Nations, the United States, did not join. There was simply not enough political support to become a member of the international community. American politicians sought to retreat from world affairs and return to a policy of isolationism, and so they did. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, the United States sought to avoid becoming a direct participant in the conflict. It was willing to go to great lengths to ensure that the Allies were provided with weapons and resources, but nothing more. That changed on December 7, 1941, when Japan launched a massive surprise attack on America's largest military base in the Pacific, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japan had been a country on the rise for several decades and had great ambitions to become a powerful nation that wielded great power and influence. Japan believed that the time had come to drive Western influence out of East Asia and liberate its Asian brothers from European and American exploitation. And once liberated, it was Japan's responsibility to protect them. It sounded like a noble cause, but it sought to free Asia through exploitation. They understood that to build an empire, Japan needed to build a strong economy and a powerful military, but lacked the natural resources needed to expel the West. It believed that the only way that it could achieve its goals was to seize those resources by force. It soon found itself at odds with the United States, which objected to Japanese expansionism. Japan was not overly concerned with the United States. It saw them as a weak enemy whose people lacked the political will to fight a war. It believed that a single strike on the American Navy would end the war with a single blow. Not everyone agreed that the United States was a weak country, or that its people would avoid war at all costs. One of Japan's greatest military leaders, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, knew the potential of the United States. He had spent a considerable amount of time in America. He understood the vastness of America's resources, its industrial capabilities, and a strong sense of determination among its people. Yamamoto saw the United States as a sleeping giant that once awakened would prove to be a dangerous enemy. And he was right. The United States did not back down after the destruction of its fleet at Pearl Harbor. Japan had woken the giant, and that spelt doom for Japan and its German ally. The United States had long been an industrial powerhouse. Although many American factories closed through the Great Depression, they were quickly reopened and retooled to produce war materials. New factories were built, increasing the amount of goods the United States could produce. With its vast natural resources, the United States had the necessary materials to supply its factories. It mobilized its population, which had grown to 150 million people, to work in its factories and serve in the military. In 1941, the US military had 1.4 million men under arms. By 1945, the size of the American military had grown to 12 million. The army itself had increased from 1.4 million soldiers to well over 8 million in just 4 years. It also developed a secret weapon, one that would change the course of world history: the atomic bomb. Yes, the sleeping giant was fully awake and would never sleep again. The United States emerged from the Second World War as the most powerful nation in the world, a title that it still holds today. As a result of the Second World War, the United States went from being a B-list actor on the world stage to the biggest superstar ever known. How exactly did this happen, and why was the Second World War the catalyst for superstardom? Let's explore. The war had devastated Europe. Hardly a major city survived unscathed. Cities such as London and Berlin were barely left standing as a result of almost continuous bombing raids. During the war, the German bombers destroyed an estimated 70,000 buildings in London. Another 1.7 million buildings were damaged. In Berlin, an estimated 80% of the city center was destroyed between Allied bombing and the Soviet Union's assault and eventual capture of the city. Dresden saw 90% of its city center destroyed in a single night. But that was not the worst. The German city of Jülich was completely leveled. 100% of its buildings were destroyed between bombing raids and fighting for control of the city during the war. Japan too faced widespread devastation. For much of the war, the Japanese home islands were safely out of reach of American bombers. That changed in June 1944, when the United States introduced the B-29 Superfortress, a new bomber that could reach Japan from great distances. The United States repeatedly attacked Japanese cities with firebombs, setting whole cities afire. On the night of March 9, 1945, the United States sent hundreds of bombers to attack the Japanese capital of Tokyo with incendiary bombs. Approximately 270,000 buildings, 25% of the city, were destroyed in this single attack. The fires killed an estimated 100,000 Japanese, with another million left homeless. The war ended when the United States attacked the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a new secret weapon, the atomic bomb. The attack on Hiroshima either damaged or destroyed nearly 70% of the city's infrastructure. In Nagasaki, nearly 40% of the buildings were destroyed or damaged. When the war finally ended, the United States found that it was stronger than it was when it entered the war. And there are reasons for that. America was protected by thousands of miles of ocean on each side, and simply could not be attacked in any meaningful way. Its cities, factories, and infrastructure remained untouched. Not only that, but America's industrial production doubled during the war. Its GDP grew by $47 billion, and the unemployment rate dropped to 1.2%. America still emerged from the war as a wealthy country with tremendous industrial capabilities. It was also more technically advanced than any other country and had the strongest military in the world. It was the only country to possess the most devastating weapon known to mankind, the atomic bomb. By the end of the Second World War, the United States had all the hallmarks of a superpower, except for one: a willingness to participate in global affairs. In the past, American politicians had no interest, no ambitions, to become a leading nation. It had shown this mentality after the First World War, when it chose to turn its back on the League of Nations and withdrew from European affairs. But this time would be different. The United States would embrace the rest of the world. It did so in many different ways. The United States committed itself to rebuilding Europe, specifically Western Europe. Through the Marshall Plan, the United States provided Western Europe with significant financial support and made available the necessary materials for countries to rebuild their cities, infrastructure, and manufacturing capabilities. It also helped rebuild Japan and created new political institutions that favored the United States. It later began to provide foreign aid to other countries around the world to curry favor among less developed countries. The United States also helped to establish and actively participate in new international institutions such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, all of whom had headquarters in the United States. It filled political and economic voids in many parts of the world as a result of the demise of the British, French, and Japanese empires. It formed military alliances such as NATO and positioned itself to become the protector of the free world. The United States was not the only country that became a superpower from the ashes of the Second World War. It was joined by the Soviet Union, which would eventually become America's biggest enemy. The Soviet Union had suffered greatly during the Second World War, especially in the early years of the conflict, but gained strength as the war progressed. By 1945, it was determined to control all of the territory it had captured from Germany. It had twice been devastated by Germany and was forced to exit the First World War before the conflict ended. After the Second World War, Russia was determined to create a buffer zone between itself and potential future adversaries. The countries of Eastern Europe would serve as that buffer zone. To ensure their loyalty, the Soviets installed communist puppet states. Europe became divided into two camps: countries that favored the United States and countries that favored the Soviet Union. This ultimately led to a Cold War in which most of the world would become polarized between the two countries. This changed in the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed. The reborn Russian Federation was still a superpower, but much weaker than it had been. It soon regained its strength, and Russia began to challenge the United States as a new Cold War started to emerge. Russia proved to be a paper tiger, however. When it invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the global community believed the conflict would last only a few weeks. Nobody ever expected Ukraine to fight back in any meaningful war, but it did. After Ukraine beat back the initial Russian advance, the Western powers began to slowly arm Ukraine with modern weaponry. Western arms changed the tide of the war. Russian equipment proved to be significantly inferior to American, British, and French weaponry, and today, the Russian army is on the defensive. Russia's status as a superpower has been questioned as a result of its failure on the battlefield, and the fact that world opinion has turned against it. Russia has very little influence in world affairs, and its economy is in tatters. It no longer meets the key qualifications of a superpower. If Russia is no longer a superpower, could the United States eventually lose its superpower status too? It's possible, but not anytime soon. America still possesses all of the traits of a superpower, but some areas are starting to weaken. The United States has amassed a staggering amount of debt in recent decades, and it faces a serious trade deficit that increases every year. Just last year alone, the trade deficit increased by more than 10%, and there are no signs that the situation will improve in the next few years. Political divisions are widening, and the ability to compromise is becoming more difficult. Even election results have been called into question. But not all is lost. America remains the most powerful nation in the world. It has a modern and powerful military that is second to none. Its economy remains the largest in the world, and there is no evidence that its influence on world affairs is in decline. Problems can be fixed, and the United States will remain a superpower for the foreseeable future. But will it be the only superpower? China may be on the verge of becoming a superpower. It possesses many of the qualities of a superpower. It has the second largest economy in the world. It has the largest army in the world, and it's rapidly modernizing its military. China has the third largest nuclear stockpile and is actively expanding its arsenal. China has a strong and unified government, and its influence outside of Asia is growing. It has the largest population in the world and possesses advanced technology. Yet China is facing some headwinds in its attempt to become a superpower. Its economy may not be as strong as it appears, and its navy still needs to build more ships that can operate far from its shores. Yes, China has the potential to become a superpower, but that might not be as soon as people think. What do you think? Will China become a superpower? Can it challenge the United States on the world stage? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more military content and analysis. Poland's military has been going through a massive transformation, possibly resulting in it becoming the next #1 military superpower in Europe, and it's making Putin's blood run cold. After centuries of domination by foreign powers, Poland freed itself from communist rule in 1989 and joined NATO a decade later. This was a critical turning point not only for NATO but for Poland itself, heralding the start of a new era in Warsaw's international relations. Long the plaything of great powers like Germany and its predecessor state Prussia, Austria, and Russia, which had partitioned its territory several times and oppressed its people in numerous, brutal ways, Poland is now on the fast track to becoming a great power itself. In the year 2023, Poland is stronger than at any point since its glory days in the 17th century, when the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth dominated much of Eastern Europe, and it is getting stronger still. Let's take a look at this incredible evolution. How is Poland transforming itself into a great power, and what does it mean for that country, Europe, and the world? The entrance of Poland into NATO was a major geopolitical advantage to the alliance. During the Cold War, the alliance struggled to contain the Soviet Union, as it and its satellite states in the Warsaw Pact stretched westward all the way to central Germany. If it so desired to move further west, NATO's forces on the European continent would be outnumbered, and the communist forces could all concentrate on a narrower front in the European plain. Poland's accession to the Western Bloc completely reversed this geostrategic situation. It was now the new, post-Soviet Russian Federation that faced the geographical disadvantage, as NATO's forces could concentrate and Russia had a much broader area of the European plain to defend should war break out. Poland's accession to NATO also cut Russia off from much of the Baltic Sea, as its coastline forms part of the natural choke point with Sweden, which in 2023 also had pending NATO membership. Put simply, on land and sea, Poland's joining NATO was one of the biggest geopolitical and geostrategic disasters for Russia after the end of the Cold War. However, Poland is no mere passive player in the alliance. It does not contribute to the free rider problem in NATO that President Obama lamented in a 2016 interview with The Atlantic, and his successor President Trump repeatedly brought up in bellicose ways in order to try and get NATO members to pay more. Poland actually carries its weight in NATO's collective security. As of July 2023, it has spent 2.42% of its GDP on defense, well above the 2% benchmark that the alliance considers its standard. This makes Poland NATO's third largest defense spender by GDP, after Greece at 3.76% and the United States at 3.47%. Poland increased its defense spending from just under the 2% benchmark in 2014 to the current 2.42% over the course of a decade. Undoubtedly, this was done primarily in response to a more aggressive Russia from 2014 onward. The Poles have a long historical memory and do not want to be the subject of Russian domination ever again. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine strengthened that resolve in Warsaw. Poland's relative level of defense spending compared to Germany's estimated 2022 total of 1.44% has even prompted many American lawmakers to propose strengthening the United States military ties with Warsaw at the expense of Berlin. some American policymakers have floated the idea of moving most of the 35,000 US military personnel in Germany further east into Poland. A 2020 reshuffling of some American troops from Germany to Poland during the twilight days of the German skeptical Trump administration was a potential preview of that process. Poland plans to do more too. It has increased its defense spending to 4% of GDP in its 2023 budget. This would have it surpass Greece and the United States as the largest per capita military spender in NATO, and put it at a level over twice that of many other longtime NATO members, such as France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. As the quantity of Poland's military spending has gone up, the quality has gone up too. It can afford to spend a hefty amount of money on top-of-the-line military equipment because Poland has enjoyed breakneck economic growth compared to the rest of Europe. It's one of the 21st century's underreported miracle stories. Indeed, since liberalization began in 1989, Poland has experienced more economic growth than the highly touted Asian tiger countries like Taiwan, Singapore, and South Korea. In effect, Poland has been the tiger of Europe in the post-Cold War era. Between 1989 and 2015, Poland's GDP per capita based on purchasing power more than doubled and reached 65% of the level seen in Western Europe. It was the highest absolute and relative level of wealth in that country since the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, according to the Brookings Institution. As of 2023, its GDP per capita is about $19,000. Since 1991, Poland's total nominal GDP has grown by 126.35%, with an annual average growth of 3.94%. Tellingly, Poland did not go into recession in the financial crisis of 2008-2009, unlike the larger European Union, which shrank by 4.5%. Poland's economy instead grew by 4.2% in 2008 and 2.8% in 2009. While the so-called PIGS countries, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, struggled with the debt crisis and austerity measures at the time, Poland continued ahead with its economic growth. The Polish economy shrank by 2.02% in 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it weathered the viral storm better than many other countries, and bounced back incredibly strongly with a 6.85% growth rate in 2021. All of this speaks highly of the robust and diversified economy that Poland has created in its modern post-communist era. Poland still places modestly in an absolute ranking of the world's economies, especially compared to its NATO peers. It has the world's 21st largest economy in GDP by 2022 dollars, with a total of $688 billion. Still, the country's economic growth has been such a success story that some observers have estimated it will have a larger economy than the United Kingdom by 2030 if its current trajectory continues. Already by GDP per capita at purchasing power parity, major cities in Poland like Warsaw, Poznan, Krakow, and Wrocław are much richer than cities in the United Kingdom like Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool. Although Poland's total GDP per capita still significantly lags the United Kingdom at $46,000 for the Poles, the trend is their friend. Their current GDP per capita is almost 11 times higher than it was in 1990, when it was only at a level of $1,731. The days of food shortages and lack of other basic necessities that the Poles experienced under communist rule, particularly in the 1980s, are long gone. The country's prosperity can be measured in another way too. After it joined the European Union in 2004, hundreds of thousands of Poles left Poland to seek opportunity in the United Kingdom, which as a fellow member of the European Union back then, was easy for them to do. Now the situation has turned on its head, as Poles who immigrated to Britain are now emigrating and returning home for better opportunities than the sluggish British economy can afford them. The Polish government is keen to hurry the process along. Its finance ministry has created a program called the Polish Deal, which offers a 0% income tax for the first 4 years to Polish émigrés who decide to return home. But Polish expatriates are not the only people seeking a better life there. The situation has reversed so much that many British and other Western European expatriates are moving into Poland, often commenting highly about the good standard of living and economic opportunity there for an affordable price. Poland's economy has become a hotbed for technological innovation and manufacturing, and it has one of the most highly educated workforces in Europe, with about 1 in 2 young Poles having achieved a post-secondary education. Foreign tech companies like Google and Microsoft are opening data centers in Poland. Meanwhile, the Swedish battery manufacturer Northvolt completed its construction of its factory in Poland in May 2023. It's the largest factory for energy storage systems in Europe. Poland also has 115 aerospace companies working in what is known as its Aviation Valley, an area in the southeast of the country that has a high number of pilot training centers and industrial and scientific research facilities. About 35,000 people are employed there, among 180 different members that do about 3.5 billion euros in sales, according to the Aviation Valley Association. The association's long-term objective is to make its area one of Europe's leading aerospace regions. Poland's post-communist financial success is all the more remarkable when one considers that its population is declining, despite the huge economic growth. Its fertility rate is only about 1.4 births per woman, well below the 2.1 needed for population replacement. By the end of the century, demographers estimate that Poland will have a population of about 23 million people, only a little more than half what it is today. With this in mind, it is possible that Poland's leaders believe they need to build a top-of-the-line military now, while their country's population and economy is at a high point. Either way, the wealth generated by its economic growth has allowed Poland to increase the quality and quantity of its military. It plans to double the size of its standing army to a total of 300,000 troops by 2035. It is also investing heavily in a modern, technological, and capital-rich military with some of the world's most advanced weapons systems. As part of this process, Poland has deepened ties with the United States and South Korea in particular. First, Poland is creating a modern air fleet based on the fifth-generation F-35 Lightning II fighter jet. Its initial order is for 32 of these planes. Meanwhile, Poland plans to rid itself of older Soviet-era planes like the fourth-generation MiG-29, which it is often keen to donate to Ukraine for the fight against Russia. Supplementing the F-35 is an order of 48 South Korean F-A-50 planes, the first 10 of which were delivered in July 2023. The F-A-50 is a light combat aircraft introduced in 2005. The jet is capable of supersonic flight and performing air-to-air or air-to-ground missions. Just as importantly, the F-A-50 is one of the world's few supersonic training aircraft, making it an ideal choice to train Polish pilots to operate the F-35. 96 American AH-54 Apache attack helicopters are also on the menu for the Poles. Poland is modernizing its tank and armored forces too. It intends to buy 116 American M1A1 Abrams tanks and 250 of the newer M1A2 Abrams tanks. Warsaw plans to supplement this force with 1,000 South Korean K2 main battle tanks. This is in addition to its own force of 1,000 Polish-made Borsuk infantry fighting vehicles. Meanwhile, Poland is steadily donating the Soviet-era T-72 tanks in its arsenal to Ukraine. For the Poles, these old systems are no longer desirable. Poland is modernizing its artillery forces as well. The government in Warsaw is spending $10 billion on the American HIMARS rocket artillery system, which proved so devastating to Russian forces in Ukraine in 2022. It has purchased 18 HIMARS systems as of March 2023, spending $414 million on this platform. And this is just the beginning. Poland plans to buy a total of 500 HIMARS systems from the United States, which will include 45 ATACMS missiles, as part of a $10 billion deal. Considering how much damage only 16 or so HIMARS systems did to Russia in Ukraine in the late summer and autumn offensives in the Kharkiv and Kherson oblasts in 2022, without the long-range ATACMS missiles, this would be a formidable force for the Poles indeed. Supplementing HIMARS are 288 South Korean Chunmoo multiple rocket launch systems. The Poles desire modern tube artillery systems as well. As part of this effort, they are in the process of purchasing South Korean K9A1 self-propelled howitzers. These systems have a range of 34 miles. 600 of these platforms are now in the country. More are likely to come. Poland is also buying about $5 billion worth of Patriot air defense missiles from the United States and is spending $2.4 billion for British CAM air defense missiles. Russian air and drone strikes against Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure undoubtedly set off alarm bells among government officials in Warsaw. Poland is creating a modern air defense network to ensure the same does not happen to its cities. Poland's military buildup in size and technological quality is rapidly creating the most formidable fighting force on the European continent. When completed, the 300,000-man standing army will be the largest in Europe by number of boots on the ground. In size, readiness, and technological capability, Poland is set to become the most militarily powerful it's been since its golden age in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth of the 17th century, which the Poles will remember fondly. The Commonwealth routinely defeated Russian forces. In fact, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth defeated Russia in the early 17th century and even occupied Moscow, something that Napoleon and Hitler failed to do, and only accomplished by one other fighting force, the Mongols. For a little while, the Poles and their Russian boyar collaborators installed the son King Sigismund III of Poland as the Russian Tsar. This episode was in many ways the height of the Commonwealth's power, but a century later, the tide would turn completely, and Poland would cease to exist as a state. Poland's new military is a source of pride, a signal that the bad times of partition, occupation, and communism have finally been banished, and Poland is retaking its place among the great powers of Europe. For the Poles, the 21st century military buildup and change in their country's status is not only a matter of pride, it is partially a matter of necessity, and for current, not just historical reasons. Poland shares a border with the heavily fortified and nuclear-armed Russian enclave of Kaliningrad in the north. Russian figures show that about 100,000 troops are stationed in this tight area, but Western experts believe the number might be twice that. Kaliningrad is also home to Russia's Baltic Fleet. Furthermore, Kaliningrad's presence along the borders of Poland and Lithuania creates a rare weakness in NATO's geostrategic position. This weakness is known as the Suwalki Gap, the 40-mile corridor across the Polish-Lithuanian border that separates Kaliningrad with Russia's vassal state, Belarus. A pincer offensive eastward from Kaliningrad and westward from Belarus threatens to cut the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, off from Poland and the rest of NATO by land. Poland would see heavy fighting in such an operation. Meanwhile, Kaliningrad is only about 240 miles north of Warsaw. With such densely concentrated forces in the enclave, a strong military capable of meeting a potential Russian offensive from its westernmost bastion is a matter of national survival. It presents a demand for increased spending that NATO states further to the west simply do not have. In effect, those countries can afford to be the free riders President Obama complained about. Poland does not have that luxury. Its territory is one that would be wrecked if a broader war were to ever break out in Europe again. Germany presents an additional demand on Poland to increase its military readiness. For historical reasons, Poland was uneasy with the comparatively warm relationship Germany shared with Russia prior to the invasion of Ukraine. This situation came partially as a result of the former's heavy dependency on Russian oil and natural gas. The Nord Stream pipeline across the Baltic from Russian to German territory was perhaps the best example of this chummy relationship. Undoubtedly, Germany and Russia's flirtation called to mind the Ribbentrop Pact, the non-aggression agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939 that partitioned Poland between them, among some policymakers in Warsaw. Poland's military expansion is a way to put pressure on the Germans to pay their fair share of NATO's defense and to remember who their true ally in the 21st century is. For now, the move seems to be paying off, as Germany has declared it will increase its defense spending to the NATO benchmark 2% of GDP in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are many skeptics who say they have heard this from Berlin many times before, however. Warsaw probably has a disproportionate amount of them. Poland has also been a leading provider of military aid to Ukraine, with 2.48 billion euros worth. This is far behind countries like the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany, but Poland's aid is the third largest of any individual country in Europe and disproportionate to its GDP. In contrast, the EU institutions have mostly provided financial aid rather than military. Ukraine's defense is a necessity for Poland. The last thing the Poles want is for Russia to get even closer to their border. Russia's aims in Ukraine are antithetical to Poland's very existence. For the United States, Poland's rise to a military great power on the European continent is a most welcome development, to the point that Washington is even willing to lend a hand in the process. In 2022, the United States Congress approved a $288.6 million military financial package to Poland to speed its arms buildup along. The stated purpose was to deter and defend against further Russian aggression in Europe. The aid mutually benefits both countries. For Washington, containing Beijing's ambitions in the Indo-Pacific region is now the #1 foreign policy priority, even with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. With Europe now only a secondary theater in the United States' geopolitical strategy, Poland's military buildup is a much welcome boost for America's goals. as it will reduce the European defense burden, which has been so disproportionately carried by the superpower across the Atlantic since World War II. The American help is welcome for Warsaw too. Poland's military spending comes at a high price tag, about 85 billion euros worth on new weapons by 2030, and with risks to come at the expense of civilian projects. Inflation in Poland is also running high, at 17%, and economic growth, though still high, is slowing. There is a risk of resource strain with such high levels of military spending. However, the leadership in Warsaw believes that the price of the arms buildup is affordable and of secondary concern. Jarosław Kaczynski, the chairman of Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, summed up the mentality behind this expansion in military spending in early 2023 when he said, "It is better to be in debt, and even to have to make cuts to budgets in other areas, than to be occupied. Whoever has seen what is happening in Ukraine should have no doubt about this." Kaczynski, a former Polish prime minister, is considered one of Warsaw's leading power brokers. He was born in 1949 and remembers the bad old days, where he was an active member in anti-communist circles in Poland. He and other politicians of his generation understand what is at stake and what needs to be protected. For them, Poland's ascendancy to a militarily great power is not only a matter of pride, but one of survival. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its numerous and varied war crimes there stirred both recent and deep historical demons in Warsaw. The response has been to build a first-rate military that will soon be without peer on the European continent, if all goes according to plan. But will it? What do you think? Tell us your opinions on Poland's economic rise and military buildup, and what it means for European and world politics. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts.